So after the 8 weeks, I sat down and I ate 144 bowls of pasta. So the next year rolls around and I said, okay, well, let's double that. I was also coincidentally, trying to prep to, qualify for the Arnold. Olive Garden ended up interviewing me for it. Never used anything with my answers because I was honest with them. I was like, look, I just wanted to gain weight. And I think when they got my answers, they're like, they're like, this is not healthy. We can't tell people about this.
Yeah. Time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Connor Karwowski, multi-ply powerlifter with a 25-15 total, founder, owner of Conjugate Strong, head high school strength coach, and he's got a degree in this shit. Let's just kind of put it that way. So did I forget anything in there?
I don't think so. I'm pretty simple.
Yes. So it's you walk the walk, you talk the talk, and you also have the education behind it. So it's going to make for a very interesting conversation. Where I want to jump off on is because I asked people for some of their topics, and you had one in there that's just like, oh, I got the Olive Garden story. We may as well just jump off with that.
Okay. So every year, Olive Garden runs a promotion. It's a never-ending pasta bowl. And for a handful of years, they sold a pasta pass. So it's basically a credit card that they gave you. You paid $100 up front. You had about 8 weeks to go in and you could eat as much as you wanted. So it was basically an unlimited pasta buffet. And, the first year I got it, my wife's father had just bought it. He just bought it for me and said, hey, take this. He said it was $100, 8 weeks to go eat as much as you wanted. And I took advantage of it. I was still in college at the time, and it was a very cheap way to get a lot of food in very quick. And this included, meat. So I could go in and, one of the sides was just grilled chicken. I could go in, I could get pasta and grilled chicken, and I could just sit there and eat for 3 hours if I wanted. So after the 8 weeks, I sat down and I ate 144 bowls of pasta.
Okay.
It wasn't that much, but it was enough where I was proud of it. So the next year rolls around and I said, okay, well, let's double that. I was also coincidentally, trying to prep to, qualify for the Arnold. And I set out to eat 300 bowls of pasta. So I sat down, I did the math, and I had to eat. It ended up being like the average 6 bowls a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I had
6 a day.
And at the time I was...
Now, how big are those bowls? Because I've been there. All I remember is like the salad and the bread, right?
Yeah.
It's a plate or a bowl. How do they do this?
So the first one is a normal size, bowl of pasta.
Yeah.
And then the second ones are about half portions.
All right.
So it's funny. I'd go in, I'd order the first one, and then I'd put in my next 3 orders right away. Because I didn't want to sit there. The longer I sat, the more I got full.
Yeah, of course.
I had a quota to hit every
like
day.
20 minutes.
It's like, let's get it in as quick as possible. And I would go every day. Sometimes I'd go in the middle of the day. Sometimes I'd go twice a day. Usually I'd end up there after training. I'd either try to bring my wife with me or try to bring one of my training partners. And I ate so much pasta. I ended up I ate 301 bowls that year. And
or over the 8 weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was well worth the $100. Olive Garden ended up interviewing me for it. Never used anything with my answers because I was honest with them. I was like, look, I just wanted to gain weight. And I think when they got my answers, they're like, they're like, this is not healthy. We can't tell people about this.
Yeah.
And it solidified my jump from 275, up to 308 because I couldn't go back down. But the thing was, I'd qualified for the Arnold at 275. And by the time I figured out that there's no way I'm cutting back down to, down to 275, I was 295 by the end of this 8 weeks. It was a great way to put down, 20, 25 pounds.
You know how many calories are in one of those bowls?
I don't, but it was quite a lot. So, but,
so they didn't stop you.
Nope.
Because that's where I thought this was going to go.
No, I think the most I ever ate in one sitting was 11 bowls. Just to see where I could go. And that's when I actually did start to feel sick and was like, okay, I got to go. But I showed back up the next day.
All right, we'll see what this comes up with. It's thinking. It's thinking actually a little bit too long for being Chat GPT. This should have been like a real easy answer. All right, we'll just let it go. But so when they filmed it or the news filmed it?
So it was just an email interview, and I think that was to assess whether or not we were going to do anything beyond that.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, I sat down and gave them a real answer on everything they asked, and they did nothing with it. They sent me a few free things.
All right, so we got 340 calories, and we'll just assume that's the first bowl.
Yeah.
Right. Then the next bowl, they're going to chip it down a little bit. Right. So 1,000 calories that you're able to put in there in that one. We're not counting the meat and shit.
Yeah.
You know, so 15, maybe close to 2,000 calories per sitting. Now, when you were doing that, because it's actually an awesome way to budget friendly figure out, because those things are hard to find.
Yep.
You know, because we can sit there and tell people about that, where, you know, McDonald's a long time ago had like $1 fucking breakfast sandwich. When I was coming up, it was like $1 for a double cheeseburger or something like that. You buy 2, get 1 free type of shit. And you figure out the cost per calorie. You're like, well, I need an excess of, you know, 2,000 calories, whatever I was trying to pull in per day. Then what's the cost of that? And then how full will I be? Because that's the other problem, right? Because you can go in there and pasta can be filling, man.
Yeah.
That can knock your next meal out. What meal was this?
So I tried to make it my last meal of the day for that reason.
Yeah.
I mean, because at the time, you know, when I really pushed this, I was getting my master's, so I was in Madison. So I'd wake up, I'd go to my classes, then I would go teach the classes that I was responsible for, because I was a TA for an undergrad anatomy course. So I'd go teach anatomy every day, and that was wonderful. Then I'd go to the gym, and, you know, I'm eating my normal food throughout all of that, and then I'd go to Olive Garden at night. Now, if I had like Friday, my schedule would be a little bit different, because I don't think I had a teaching responsibility that day. I don't think the class ran on Fridays, if I remember correctly, so I could go in the middle of the day. But if I ate too much before like my training session, it would screw that up, because it just, I mean, it's
hard. Yeah.
Cement, and
it's not like the all you can eat Chinese buffet.
Yeah.
You know, that's like good for the middle of the day, because you can still pound it later in the night.
Yeah.
If we spin way back, because I like to speak to lifters about this, and this will be an even more engaging conversation, because you understand where I'm going to be going with all this. If we go into your childhood sports development when you were a kid, you know, how there's certain developmental stages that peak's the wrong word, that develop at the best genetic rate during certain ages. Endurance is, you know, very, very young, and then explosive strength, visual acuity, and all those things. Yep. So when I look at powerlifters, or it's even more of a fascinating conversation when you talk to like NFL athletes or pro athletes from different disciplines to see what they did at certain ages to be able to maximize those abilities. And we see this in conjugate a lot, right? Because you have the explosive quality, and then you have the quality to strain, like max, you know, max, and it's on a spectrum, but everybody's going to fall somewhere on that spectrum. You know, I saw more on the more explosive point, and then you begin to do deep dives and wonder, like, well, why is that? Well, then you go way back. Well, I did a lot of jumping, and I did a lot of explosive stuff during these teenage years when that was at that greater capacity. Not saying you can't develop it at later years, but you'll never be able to develop it to its fullest potential if it was done at the right time. So when you were growing up as a kid, what sports were you participating in? So
mainly soccer. I think my dad had signed me up for soccer, you know, by kindergarten. So like that's just what I did pretty much year round. And then I tried everything but baseball. And every year he'd ask, and my answer was always the same. I did not want to wear pants. That is the answer. I did not want to sit in the sun wearing pants. I've always been a comfort first type person, and I was not going to sit in the sun wearing pants. And it sounds stupid, but like I'm being completely honest. Like I wasn't going to play sports and wear pants at the same time.
That's interesting. I avoided it because it just seemed so freaking boring. Like all you're going to do is like stand there and wait, or sit and wait. Where, you know, soccer, you're moving all the time. With So you're hitting all different motor abilities.
Yes.
You know, the endurance and so forth. As you progress through your teenage years, was there any specialization that began to happen?
So throughout middle school, I also tried, volleyball, basketball. I tried basically whatever I could that was offered to us. And then I ended up switching to football when I got to high school because, I was always a large child. I mean, by 5th grade, I was 200 pounds. And I just kind of maintained that through 8th grade. And then I got to high school and my dad said, well, you're very aggressive when you play soccer. You might as well just play a sport where you can hit people without having to hide it or, conceal it with just your shoulder. And I switched over to football and excelled at that pretty quickly. I played I was an O-lineman. So, they gave me 5 things to think about. And that was just, I did those 5 things really well. And that's all I needed to do. And because I came from soccer, I also punted and kicked. And that was my way of getting out of doing the hard stuff on special teams. Yeah. Because otherwise it's just sprinting and hitting people. And I don't really want to do that.
Yeah. The lineman kicker.
Yeah. But
kind of funny.
It worked out well. So, because special teams was the worst part of practice because it was just sprinting,
running. Yeah,
just fucking sprinting.
Oh, I didn't think about that. If you're the kicker,
yeah, I just get to sit there and watch everybody go. And hopefully those 10 guys do their job, and I don't have to do anything afterwards. But that's fine. But in terms of specialization, I not really, because I stopped playing football after a few years, and I had kind of some other stuff going on, and I just completely lost interest. And while I was getting into football, my 8th grade year, my dad said, hey, you should probably start lifting weights. He didn't know anything about lifting weights, but he knew enough that it was important for that to happen. So I started to kind of fall in love with that process, but amidst this other stuff going on, I kind of lost the drive to want to do that, the drive to play football, and I just stopped doing kind of everything. And at a certain point, he said, yeah, well, if you're going to live here, you have to do something healthy. If you're not going to do this stuff, you have to do something healthy. So I started lifting again with the intent to just kind of look good. Yeah. I didn't know powerlifting existed at the time. I mean, it wasn't really a thing in Wisconsin, to the level that it is right now with the high school. Because right now, I mean, it's big. Yeah. It's big. Towards the last year or so I was in high school, it started kind of exploding up. I think one of the schools in the city that I grew up in had, 80 or 90 kids on their powerlifting team by the time I was a sophomore in college.
What was pulling you away from the sports and the training?
I started to fall into very, very deep depression. And that's just something I've lived with, since that. It was like one day when I was 13 or 14, I woke up and my brain just decided, hey, you're not going to be happy at a consistent rate anymore. And that's a weird thing to kind of go through. And it's not really something I've ever talked about openly, aside from my best friend and my wife and the professionals who I've, sought out to deal with it. But, it ruined all of the things that I, liked at the time.
How did it manifest, right? Because a lot of these words like depression, anxiety, and mental health is even more broad. It's and strength training, it's just get strong. Yeah. So how did that manifest where you didn't want to participate in sports, withdrawn, I get that. Did it also impact grades?
No. So I think, the biggest thing I was always concerned with was, truly letting my parents down. And I knew that, sports, and this bubbled under the surface for quite some time. It is what it is. I was ashamed that this is the way I felt. And there's still some of that, within me. It never goes away. Yeah. It is what it is. It's still there. I didn't want to admit that there was any sort of issue. And at a certain point, it got bad enough where my parents said, hey, what the fuck's going on? And I tried to explain it, the best that I could, while maybe not giving them all of the information, but enough that like, okay, well, if you can help, you can help. And, they said, well, you're at a point in your life where your hormones are going all over the place. Just give it tight. It sounds like it'll be all right.
Now, how tall were you at this time?
5'10", 5'11".
Okay, so you still were going through puberty.
Yeah.
So that definitely was playing a role.
Yeah. So, I waited and waited and waited, and it did not get better.
Okay.
And I kept losing interest. But, back to your point about, grades, like that was like the one thing that I would not let slip. Because I knew that if, I could say no to the sports, I could pull back from that stuff. I could pull back from, the lifting and the exercise. And if I kept the grades going fine, I knew that they wouldn't be on my back about it as much.
Yeah.
But the moment that started to slip, it would be, if I got a fucking B+, my mom was on my ass about it. Because, they always wanted the best for me. Just, if you want to get into a good college, if you want a good job, get a fucking A in every class. And, so I kept that up well. But the other thing is I didn't struggle academically till I got to college. As this, progressed and got worse. But I thought high school, and I still think high school in general academically we're not asking that much of our kids. I mean, a lot of it is just, if we take a step back now, we look at it as just basic problem solving, like especially when we look at like math, like just figure out how to work through a damn problem. Like I don't use anything more than fucking basic, like algebra, 99% of my life. And if I have to do anything more than that, I'm going to sit online till I figure it out. So I learned the process of figuring it out.
It's still hard for young boys and men to just sit somewhere and just try to absorb that. It's like sometimes I think you should just let them fucking run around, and find a different way, because it does kind of teach you to be all locked in. But I wonder how much that really matters, once you get into the real world and you have to function and, do other things. So with the training, when you came back to it, right? Because originally you were kind of training because of the sports. And then when you came back to it and started training, I'm assuming this is, correct me if I'm wrong, like just some bodybuilding, type of model. Yeah.
Well, it was it's not structured at all.
Yeah.
And, truthfully, it was a substitute for self-harm.
Okay, so
that's really what it was. You spend enough time feeling like this, things just start to feel like nothing. You start to feel numb, and you start trying to figure out how to, feel and cope with it. And that's where, I turned to that initially. And
how so though? Because that can be, these are interesting conversations, right? Because you know how the body works now, right? So was it self-harm in the way of just the straining, or were you just training so hard that you would just be sore as hell the next day?
Well, if you start with, cutting yourself on one side, and that releases whatever it does in the brain to make you feel, anything. You feel like, okay, well, if I feel nothing right now and I do this and I feel something, I'm managing it.
And it's immediate.
Yeah. And I quickly found that if I pushed my body to any sort of just hard, intensity level, it felt similar. So what started as, 30, 40 minute workouts where I just went in and I said, okay, well, I can do bicep curls for fucking 30 or 40 minutes. Then I figured out, okay, well, if I can do a row and I can do these squats, and I started working out in my parents' basement.
Was it the burning of the muscle that was kind of scratching that itch, or was it how you felt that next day?
All of it.
All of it. Okay.
All of it. It's just, that being in pain.
So not a lot of singles though, right? Because it's not going to actually do that.
But I had very limited access to equipment. I mean, we had dumbbells. I went to play 45s. I had like a single, like one 5-pound plate, one, and my dad, again, I was given, every opportunity I, could ask for. Sometimes I just had to wait for him. He picked up whatever weights I wanted. But what started as 30 or 40 minute workouts quickly, evolved into hour and a half to 3 hours. And I remember some days, as this, thing progressed, there were some days I'd spend 6 hours at the gym just because if I was there working out, putting my body through hell, I couldn't sit alone with, my own thoughts in hell. So it was a lot easier for me to just do that. And in hindsight, I know it was very, very unhealthy for me to develop that relationship with it.
Yeah, I know this is where the podcast stops and the ad starts, and most of you guys just want to skip ahead. But hang on, because this one actually matters to me. You all know who John Meadows was. John and I were very close friends. So I'm proud to partner with Granite, which was his company. The principles and values that he had as a person, he instilled into the company. The Meadows whey protein, it's just simply whey. The way that I use that is right after training because I want it to digest faster. I want it to get into my system faster. The other product is creatine, which is like a no-brainer at this point. Everybody should use creatine. Even if they don't train, everybody should be using creatine just for the neural benefits associated with that. Right now, you can get 10% off with code TABLETALK at granitenutrition.com. If you've ever respected John, this is how we keep his legacy alive.
And I got out of that, after, this cycle of, hey, I've got it under control. Hey, my parents say, well, what's going on? We go to the doctor. Doctor says, hey, you got to do this. Eventually, I said no to drugs for a really, really long time to deal with this. In fact, for over a dozen years, I said no. In hindsight, I shouldn't have. But I got to high school and I, decided that, okay, well, I'm going to do whatever and I can get my hands on because that's what the cool kids are doing. So let's just try it all. And I got caught once. And at the time I was still very invested in, football. I wanted to play college football. So getting caught once was enough for me to say, okay, I'm not going to do any of this. But, adjacent to this, I was also very involved with, metal and hardcore music. And within that, lifestyle, there's a subgenre in there it's called straight edge. And what that essentially is the abstinence of anything that negatively impacts your life. And the biggest ones are, drugs and alcohol. So I just adhered to that. And that's what the 3X's on my leg mean. Like the moment day I turned 18, like that, I got that on there because I was like, this is how I live my life. But I got caught and, I was like, okay, this just makes sense. Let's do this. If I don't have this other stuff under control, let's try to control at least one part of my life in this way. So I swore all that off. And anytime I'd go to the doctor, they'd say, well, we can look at drugs. And I'd say, no drugs for me.
Interesting. I don't know shit about the death metal because it all sounds the same to me. Like some people, country sounds the same, rap sounds the same, all that. But there's a lot of subgenres. How did you go about finding that subgenre?
So it actually happened kind of by chance. My sister was into, she's older than me. She's 4.5 years older than me. And she's into, heavier music. And I think I took her iPod one day when I was in middle school and just looked at, the artist. And I said, okay, well, I'm just going to start listening to this. And, it kind of started. I was always into alternative kind of new metal music growing up. I really liked Linkin Park as a kid. And then, I got from there, the gateway into Korn and Slipknot. And then, you start getting into harder and heavier stuff. And so that's how I got into, metal and hardcore. And then you find out about, within specifically hardcore, about straight edge. And there's bands who are just totally devoted to just talking about that and promoting that message. And I identified with it and I think it was because it was a fringe thing. Yeah. It was a fringe within a fringe. And I wanted to be, just unique in that way. I don't know, but I was very drawn to it. So yeah, it was a very strict, just no drugs, no alcohol, and I never looked back from that. So that's just how I.
So with that and training like a maniac, I don't want to use the word helped, right? But it stabilized.
It made me feel like I was managing.
Yes.
And I think that's why, I was never ready to kind of accept help. It would get to a point where, again, it was bad enough where people would notice and they'd say, hey, we got to do something about this. Then I would, catch on and say, okay, well, I'm going to get my shit together good enough here where I can just bypass this. Because I didn't want to accept it. I remember, the second or third time, brought me into, our family doctor, and he says, hey, well, if this isn't getting any better, because I sat there and I waited. Everybody just kept telling me to wait. First time I went in and saw him, he said, well, your hormones are going, kind of all over the place. You should probably just wait it out. If you don't want to go the drug route here. And I just kept fucking waiting.
Yeah. It sounds like they were coming from a good place.
Yeah.
And with, you're still experiencing these beginner gains during this time period.
Yeah.
And
it was great.
Was it though? Because that really wasn't what you were training for, right? So the getting stronger was just a side effect, of experiencing the discomfort associated with the training. And so now when you go into college, did you have some idea of what you wanted to actually major in?
No. I went in, again, back to my parents, always wanted the best for me. They said, hey, you're smart enough to be a doctor. I said, okay, well, let's just do that. I applied to one college, because at this time I didn't fucking care. I was only doing it because I knew my parents wanted me to do it. And I knew that it was probably the right choice at the time. But my second option was, I was going to go learn how to weld. My uncle, he ran a business that he also taught welding at, the tech school up there, but he essentially ran a business where he'd go in and, kind of audit, welds and, buildings, and say, hey, here's what's up to code. Here's what needs to be better and whatnot. And, I like working with my hands, but that goes back to that, I just like monotonous work, that that distracts me up here, and give me a pile of fucking dirt and tell me to move it 5 feet and give me all day in the sun. I'll do it. I'll shut everything off and I'll just do it. So I didn't know what I wanted to do in college, but I knew I wanted to do something if I was going to go and do it with science. So I went in and, I said, okay, well, let's just do a biology degree. That's fairly broad. If I want to go to medical school, that will get the job done, and I can kind of specialize with classes later on if that's the goal. Otherwise, at least I have a base for anything, science-wise after the first year and a half or 2 years with the gen eds out of the way. I very quickly found out that I was not interested in studying things that I was not interested in. I didn't care. But
that's kind of rough when it's the first 2 years. All the general ed shit.
Yeah. But I couldn't force myself to care anymore. And that is the point where my grades started to suffer. My parents finally said, hey, you need to get your shit together, in a caring way. But I knew exactly what they meant. And again, I denied it and, tried to say, okay, there's not an issue here. It was just the class. It was just the teacher. And it wasn't. I knew that. But again, what made the situation worse is there wasn't like a defining moment or event in my life that I could point back and say, hey, here's why you feel this way. I grew up in a house where my parents have been married my whole life. We didn't struggle financially. I never was hungry. I was given every opportunity I could ask for. If there was something I wanted, sometimes I just had to wait a little bit. My dad worked his ass off. My mom made sure my dad was in check on that too and did whatever she could to make sure that me and my sister had every opportunity in the world. So when I'd sit there and think about it, I'd say, I don't have a fucking reason to feel like this. And that'd make me feel even worse about it. But I would just keep pushing that back, and I'd use, training at this point to, kind of take care of that and manage it the best that I could. But, grades started to suffer. And, there was a semester where, I told them, I said, I don't know if this is what I want to do anymore. So I pulled back and I went to school part-time that one semester. I ended up switching majors at that time. And, I switched majors, which means I had to go switch advisors. And I met my first advisor. I'm sure he was good at his job, but he didn't help me.
Now, when you were going part-time, what did you do with the other time? Did you work someplace?
I worked out.
I just trained.
I worked out. I mean, this whole time I had maintained a job. I worked at a grocery store up there. Okay. Kroger owns them now. It's called Pick and Save. And the moment I turned 18, I started working third shift. So this is even when I was in, high school, and we could fit it in. Like on the weekends, I'd work third shift because I didn't want to talk to people. I withdrew so much from pretty much every aspect of life that I could. And so yeah, I was working third shift at a grocery store in the dairy department, so I could sit in the cooler all night. And
well, the reason I ask is sometimes when people go through their story similar to what you're telling me here, you'll find that they ended up taking a job, and it was something that they absolutely knew they never wanted to have to do the rest of their life, where that wasn't the case, right? It was just kind of taking a break to figure it out. So let's get back to you're speaking to this advisor.
Yep. So so we just start talking. I didn't really know strength and conditioning existed because the college I was at was small. It's one of the UW, University of Wisconsin Extension schools up there. They didn't have a football team. They didn't really have a budget at the time for a strength and conditioning coach. I didn't have one in high school. I went to a small high school. It just didn't exist. Our O-line coach just helped us out. When I was
So training wise, you're literally just winging it. You're just going in and doing whatever you can do hard as you can.
Yep. And I pick up a muscle and fitness magazine sometimes and go, okay, well, that seems fine. That makes sense. I'll do that. And again, I was young enough where anything fucking worked. I was getting better. I was looking the way I wanted to look, and that's all that mattered. But, I meet with this new advisor, and, she says, well, one of the things that we have to do if you're going to switch majors, I switched into what was called applied health sciences. It was kind of a broad term for anybody that wanted to go into, physical therapy or occupational therapy or anything sort of in that realm.
So you're still kind of thinking the whole medical backup plan in a way.
But she said, well, look, we don't have an exercise science minor right now. But if you're interested in that, we can fit those classes into this major. So she said, if you want to do PT, because that's sort of where my head was at. I said, okay, well, that's kind of like, personal training, but you get a little bit more of the physical therapy. That's what we're looking at. So you got to take this one class. So that an intro class for the major that everybody who, gets the major has to take. I take the class, and one of the requirements is that you have to go get, 20 or 30 hours shadowing the profession that you are most interested in. So I go and shadow a physical therapist, and I decide that I fucking hated it. It was wildly depressing on top of what I was already experiencing, but and I cannot speak for all, but where I was at, 90% of the patients that, the physical therapist that I saw, or that I was shadowing, that she saw, were people who were just being forced to be there. Insurance said they have to be there. Their caregivers said they have to be there. They didn't care. And I was wholly uninterested in dealing with that. So that lasted for about a semester, and then, I sat down and talked with her again, and she said, well, if you just want to work with athletes, we can look at, athletic training. And I said, I don't want to be on the back end of shit. Like, the front end, we can tape ankles and shit. Like, that's cool. It's rewarding for the people who like that, but I don't want to be on the back end. I want to be on the front end, making sure that they don't have to go see those people, because I just like training. I mean, I had a conversation with the advisor, and they just listened to me as a person and figured out what I liked and advised me the way that they should.
So it's almost like an independent studies where they're putting things together to try to position you for what you potentially thought you wanted to do.
So they put me on a pre-kinesiology track.
Okay.
And then eventually, I meet my wife, and I find that I've got a reinvigorated sense to push even harder. So I decide, okay, I want to get my master's. If I'm going to be a strength and conditioning coach, that seems like, the next level that just makes sense.
What about her reignited that?
I cared about something more than just myself. That's the easiest way to kind of boil it down. At the time, it's like, again, I'm still just kind of going through these motions to make sure that my parents are kept happy with it and I'm not letting them down. But, her, entrance into my life gave me more to just care about. And it made me want to just be better in general. Yeah. So
Did she have those qualities?
We are complete opposites. I mean, she's not involved with like music or metal or anything like that.
No, I mean, just from that studying standpoint.
Yeah.
And
she can sit down and write out a study plan for 4 months and stick exactly to a T. And I just held on and got through school the night before every exam.
Okay.
You know, it was one of those things where like, okay, well, if she's really good at this, I should probably get my shit together if I want to impress her too. So,
yeah. I mean, it's in the back of your mind. Are you thinking that, if I actually want to have a long-term relationship with this person, I can't be this fucking loser that's just going to end up dropping out of college. I got to figure something out.
Yeah, exactly. It just, I needed my life to be more than what it was. And like I said, her entrance was a catalyst for me to basically get my shit together to a much higher level than it was.
It's interesting how things are stacking together, because now you have that advisor and now you have a better plan. So you can go right back in and say, okay, here's the direction. And then they can start steering the classes to be able to do that as well.
And school got a lot easier. Because I started taking classes I was actually interested in. So it was like, so I'd pick up the textbook and I go, well, everything in here is interesting. So I just keep fucking reading and I'd learn it. I'd go ace the exams. And, the last 2 years, I had to take an extra semester on top of my bachelor's because I took classes that I didn't need and took like a genetics class because I was in the bio major there. And while it was interesting, it didn't do anything for me, major wise. And I couldn't tell you anything about that other than the fact that we played with a bunch of fruit flies every week. But yes, I had to tack on an extra semester there. But yeah, the last 2 years of college became so much easier when I started taking classes I was interested in.
It's a huge takeaway, because my college story in some ways is similar to where I'm still not sure why I even went. It's kind of just expected, but I didn't have the grade point to be able to get in. So I had to go to a really small school. And then in that school, I ended up taking courses I should have taken in high school, like algebra, biology. I took rock science in high school. I took business math. And that was kind of easy because it was a small school. Then I transferred to Bowling Green State University and flunked out after the first quarter. Or yes, it was quarter semester, whatever it was. And so then I had a 0.75 grade point average. And I still didn't know what the hell I wanted to do, right? It's just like, but when I came back, my fear was you flunk out twice, you're not getting back in and you're probably not getting anywhere else. So I spent several years just walking through, this is years ago, so we didn't have iPads and shit, walking through the bookstore and just looking at the books. Like, that looks interesting. I'm going to take that class. And there was 2 times this happened where the same class in different fields used the same book. I'm like, no brainer here, right? Like, how different can their syllabus be? Yeah. And so it'd be like deviant criminal behavior and psychology and, all this stuff that fascinated me. And then after I met my wife, we sit down and she was like, how many credit hours do you have? And I don't remember, I'm not real good with the numbers like this, except for my own power lifts and other people's power lifts, like 166. She's like, you only need 161 to graduate. Like, what the fuck? What do you mean? Because all I care about is powerlifting. Yeah. Right. So all this stuff is just so secondary anyhow. And I go to every college on campus and they have those little sheets that you're supposed to check off, what you need to be able to graduate. And I was a class away from a sociology degree. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this? Like, be a census taker? Like, what the hell? And at that point, my grade point was high enough to transfer, where I needed a 2.5. And I never wanted to go back and take the classes that I failed, right? Because, I still thought I was stupid. All this long story goes into that, but I was afraid to do that because that was too much of a risk. But I could take all this other shit that I knew I'd be interested in and did fine, with not caring, because powerlifting was still the main thing. But then I transferred to the University of Toledo and I had a counselor kind of like what you're talking about. She said, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I want to be a strength coach. She's like, we don't have anything for that. And she's like, let's talk about it. Like, okay, what do you think you need? Well, exercise science, kinesiology, biomechanics. I definitely need public speaking, communication courses. And we laid it all out. And from that point, I never got less than an A in anything. Because and it was easy.
Yeah.
I remember I took nutritional biochem, which would be like a level 4, 400 level course with no chemistry background. And aced that because it was fascinating the shit out of me. It's like, this is what happens when protein goes through your system, because this isn't what the fucking bros in the gym are telling me. And but just having that path, you know, to be, and I had enough of the you know what I'm saying? It's kind of, you had enough of the bullshit in there that you only had to put in a few different things, you know, to be able to do that. And so once that decision was made for you, I guess the moral of the story that we're telling people here is, if you're in college and you don't have a clue what you're doing, take classes you're interested in to at least keep the GPA at a certain level. Have the discipline. This was a big thing for me too, because the other thing I did differently is I actually started going to class. Where before, you know, it's just like, here's the syllabus, here's the test. I'll just cram beforehand and go. If I get a fucking D, it passes. You know, C, it passes. Then when it's something you're really interested in, you don't want to miss. You really don't. Then when you go, blew my mind. This is so fucking, what blew my mind is when I actually went to class, I didn't have to study as much. Because you remember, and the summer classes were amazing because it was every day. So you didn't have all this other shit, you know, kind of diluting that when it went in there. And so stick to it that way. Try to figure out what you can do and speak to your advisor, man. If you have a shitty advisor, find a new one. Because there's a lot of room to play with this stuff that I didn't even realize. I'm sure you didn't either. You don't even realize, especially when you go in. Because it's like, here, you just got to take these general electives, and it's such a stupid fucking way it's all set up, where so many different things can be replaced in there that even if you don't know what you want to do, there's enough outliers, slight outliers, that maybe that could be something. All right, guys, I want to take a moment to speak about the World Powerlifting Organization, the WPO. Here's a few dates that you should pay attention to. October 10th and 11th, 2025, it's the APO WPO Bench Bash at the Olympia. This will be in the Convention Center. On the 10th, that's the APO side, and that's open to raw, single ply, and multi-ply. On October 11th, which is the WPO version, that's poly shirts only, but you can use as many layers as you want. So if you're a competitor, contact AJ Roberts. His email will be in the description. If you're not a competitor, just stop by and check this out. This is gonna be amazing. You're gonna see weights lifted that you typically will never see lifted anywhere else. It's in the expo, you're already there. Stop by, check it out. You know, go that route. So now that you kind of knew what that track was, and school became way easier, with how did the depression, how's this play into all that?
So I think it got pushed, you know, a little bit deeper, you know, just not in terms of like
more compartmentalized.
Yeah, you know, I got to, it didn't get worse. I'll say that, you know, as things started flourishing with, you know, my wife, you know, that got pushed back as I started enjoying what I was doing in school. It got pushed back as I, you know, worked with, like, I got, you know, doctor, it kept going back and forth with the doctor, and they said, okay, we're going to send you to a psychiatrist. And, you know, psychiatrist said, we can put you on these drugs. And I said, no. And they said, okay, well, you got to start therapy. And we weren't a good fit. So I went to a handful of sessions and lied and said, hey, thank you. You really equipped me with the things I needed for this. I think I'm feeling better. When in actuality, I wasn't. But eventually I got linked up with a counselor. He couldn't even push drugs if he wanted to. It wasn't an option. And that was the first time that working with somebody, a professional on this, I felt like things were getting better. Because I didn't go in and feel like I was somebody just in a room that they needed to fix. He just made me feel like a person. Just asked me about myself, asked me about what I like to do, asked me about my goals, my dreams, my aspirations, talked me through, you know, how we're going to do that, what I'm currently doing, what I could do better. And then eventually we started working on, you know, coping mechanisms for how I felt, internally. It wasn't until he figured out who I was as a person and, humanized me with the whole situation, not just brought me in and said, hey, tell me why you're sad. He made, he listened to me. And, that was a big kind of turning point because I felt like I was actually making improvements. And that is where I stopped lifting for 6 hours. He said, he brought it up. He said, this isn't healthy. You need to just, understand that, you go in, you go for hour and a half, you do what you need to do. That's enough. So, and then as I, continue to learn more about this, I tightened things up. I figured, okay, well, this is effective. This isn't. 6 hours was not effective. And, that whole process just got better, training wise throughout all of that. But, yeah, I mean, the depression got pushed back a bit. And, if you ask anybody who's kind of lived with this, I think they'll probably tell you the same thing. It never really goes away. It's kind of like you're dragging a ball and chain around kind of all the time. Sometimes the ball weighs, a pound, sometimes it weighs 1,000 pounds, and certain things throughout the day, throughout the year, month, can influence, what that weight is. And I don't think it's ever gone. At least I've never felt like it's gone. There are certain times where I may forget about it for a little bit. But it could be, as quick as, 2 seconds, I see something and I go, oh shit, that's there. So, and again, this whole time I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. Everybody just kept telling me to wait. And, but again, the counselor, he actually equipped me with, a way to deal with this, and a lot of it was just, figuring out how to get, your body to relax and then just kind of pivot. And that was it. So we went through a lot of progressive relaxation stuff, and I finish most of my days now with that. It's an easy way for me to pivot away from, if training's going, if that's stressful, if work is stressful, I come home, I'm sitting on my phone trying to get through athlete check-ins and I got 80 messages to get through and I get through all of that and I just can't turn off. It's just put the phone away, just sit down, relax, work on breathing and just chill out.
So when you're working on the breathing, walk me through how you do that, right? Because this is kind of where everybody will get. And it's like, well, you just need to meditate, and all this other kind of stuff too. When you're doing that, there's different ways to go about, right? So when you sit down, you got to unplug. So you put the phone away, then you start with nasal breathing, right? So the nasal breathing, and then mentally, right? Because your mind's still turning. Right. So at some point you have to stop the mind or reframe. Some people will start with, just focus on what their feet feel like. Do you do any of that or?
So I used to go through, total body, tighten it up, get it to relax. And I'd go head, toe to head. Now what I do, cause that kind of stresses me out and that'll, if I'm squeezing, doing an isometric contraction, sitting there in bed, my blood pressure is going to go up a little bit. My heart rate's going to go up a little bit. So I close my eyes, I start, the nasal breaths. And then I focus just on literally the blackness on my eyelids. That's it. And I'm just trying to look as far into that as possible. And that is just what I've developed over years. I close them and I just stare into nothing.
Do you see weird shit when you do that?
Eventually, because I feel like you get into a lucid dream state. And then stuff will just start popping up and you kind of catch yourself and you get out of it. And then eventually I just fall asleep.
I mean, I'll see weird shit, almost cloud-like patterns that will bounce around. And then it gets to my brain firing, what the fuck am I actually seeing? Is that is it the blood vessels in my eyelid? What the? But it's interesting, but I'm glad you said that because those are the type of things that people kind of miss, right? Where if I'm not able to fall asleep, I may start with, not what do my feet feel like? What does this blanket feel like on my toe? Then the other foot, is flipped over the blanket because you can't have both feet. Then what does this feel like? Then you just start working up, what does the pressure on my calf feel? I don't flex because I learned the same thing that you did. Like if you flex and all of a sudden, especially if you're a meathead, you know, you're in this excited state and it's like, now you're thinking about the next fucking lift you want. Bad idea. But I just think my way all the way up. And then you find that stops, you know, or I'll just say no thought, right? Counting doesn't work either, because then I start seeing myself doing reps of shit, which is kind of fucked up, and then it will put you out. But so if we go back into your journey through all this, at what point did the strength training become for you personally, and how did it coincide with the educational side? Did you start looking at things from more periodized models?
So it's probably, I get to college, start working out in, you know, the weight room at the college there, and there's another, you know, guy in there. I see him lifting in these funny looking shoes. He's got an old pair of the Olympic, the Addy Power shoes, you know, the heel shoes. And he's squatting, you know, a good amount. He's got 4 plates or whatever on the bar. And
so what's your strength at this time?
I was maybe deadlifting like 315.
Okay.
I don't think I could bench 225 at the time. I
well, the way you were training, this all makes sense.
My endurance was great, but I just, you know, so I see him, you know, I go in there, I'm just training, kind of doing basically, you know, the same thing, but, you know, as I'm working with this counselor, we're tightening things up and just I'm learning a little bit more. And he tells me he's training for powerlifting, and that's basically what sparked my interest in it. You know, I saw this guy who was stronger than me working hard in the gym, and I was drawn to that. You know, it gave me, you know, something to focus on a little bit more while I was in the gym.
Did you know what powerlifting was at that time?
I had no clue. So I looked into that, and then that's just what I started. I started training with strength in mind. That was it.
With that person, or just
he became effectively my first training partner. That's just what kickstarted, you know, me into it.
Now, was that basic progressive block trained model, or how was the model?
So as I started getting into, you know, powerlifting, we had gotten hooked up with some guy, I don't even remember his name, in the Milwaukee area, who gave us a mesocycle. It was a month-long, you know, just it was essentially 5-3-1.
Okay.
It was just super basic, and I ran it for like 2 months straight and put 50 pounds on my maxes both times. I was like, all right, this is great. Let's just keep doing this. Yeah. And by about the 5th time of me trying that, I realized this is not working anymore. But I got really strong really quick because I had a really good base built. Yeah. So my strength, my numbers, you know, shot up right away. So I was squatting, you know, mid 4s. I kept bouncing back and forth between figuring out how to deadlift. My first 405 deadlift was sumo, and it was the worst fucking sumo deadlift in the world. And then I don't think I pulled sumo for like 10 years after that.
Well, during this phase, were you focusing even at all on the technique, or just doing the weights and reps and the percent?
Grab it and go. Yeah. Grab it and go. I didn't think technique was important. You know, just move it.
Well, you're getting stronger too. Yeah. So it's a weird thing, because somebody could tell you at the time, and you're like, dude, I just put 100 pounds on my lift in the last 12 months. Shut up. You know, this is working.
Yeah. So as that progressed, I found an old, you know, Ed Cohen program, and that was, you know, 10 weeks, just straight linear. And I ran that, and that worked out, you know, well for a few times. And then my training partner at the time, Matt Sharafinsky, he started at the time, you know, Shiko had I don't think it came directly from him. Somebody else had put together some of his stuff into an app. And this was a very, you know, rudimentary app. And we started using that, and I ran that for a little bit, and I ran that for a while. And I just felt real stagnant with it. And I understand now that because it was not coming directly from him, it was not the way he would have, like, you know, truly done things. And there were a lot of variables in the app that I just didn't understand how to control. But I think the one big thing for me that ended up, you know, as I was learning about stuff in school and just in general, that landed me on the conjugate side of things is the entire time I was running the Shico program, I never felt like I was going heavy enough to feel confident with that. So I needed a way for me to push things heavy, but I also liked lifting heavy. And, the introduction of, weekly max effort work allowed me to do that. So I just dove deep into, conjugate after that.
So where are you at in your education at this time? Are we at the master's level yet?
No,
or are you still undergrad?
I am probably a junior, maybe going into my senior year, third or fourth year of college.
And are you starting to see connections between what you're learning in the classroom and training yet?
Yes. Yeah. But, as far as, like curriculum wise, in terms of like programming for training, we never really made it out of, like the CSCS book. Like that's basically like the top end level that you're learning, unless you have an exceptionally good professor who just decides to give you more and more. But I mean, you do have a finite amount of time in school.
But you're learning, fiber types, and you're learning, and the ATP prep cycle, which is in every fucking class over and over again. And you can, for me, I was able to make spurious correlations, I guess would be what it is. I mean, I wouldn't say they're direct correlations, but it's like, okay, I see this kind of applies here. Right. And why did you decide then for the masters? Because now this is going up, and indirectly what you're what you're learning is there's different training models. These models for you at the time probably seemed completely vastly different because they're all different names, right? And at that point, were you starting to see some of the similarities between all of these models, or were they just still separate models?
I could see, parallels in terms of like, okay, this is why, this piece would be linear, and this is why, volume is kind of allocated in different spots in this one versus, like Louie always talked about, like the 80-20 rule, where, 20% of your volume's on your main stuff and 80% is on, the accessories. Whereas like with Shico, like there wasn't really a set rule there, but you did a whole lot of volume on the main lifts, and that's just how you got better there versus kind of increasing your base underneath it and then focusing on fine-tuning things to max effort work. But where is it going here?
Well, I was looking for the correlations with the undergrad, and then basically because you have the classroom learning, and then you have the in the gym learning, right? And the in the gym learning has a lot of gaps, I guess is what I'm saying. And especially as you're going through that and you're trying to figure it out. And this is true for everybody, by the way. Some people just never get past that phase and never try to figure out what the commonalities are and what the differences are. And was it trying to figure out those things that made you think, I want this master's in this?
It was multifaceted. So my wife and I did not go to the same undergrad school. She went to Madison, and I was at an extension school back in close to the city that we grew up in. And so she was up there. She's 2 years younger than me, so she still had like a year and a half left when I got done. So that, at Madison, they had a good program. I wanted to be a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. So she's up there. They have a football team. They have a master's program that's non-thesis, because I was not interested in doing research, but I wanted to continue learning. So it was, there's a few different, things that played into it. And I applied to a handful of schools for my master's, but that's the one, if I got in, I was going there because I wanted to be closer to her. And they had the football team, of course. And I ended up not doing anything with the football team. It was, it was a weird situation when I got there, with our program and with, the current strength staff that was, there. But that ultimately is what led me into working with high schoolers, kind of just by chance. I get there and I meet with our, internship coordinator.
I assume you're looking for ways to maximize your training. I'm Dave Tate from elitefts.com. I started Elite FTS in 1998 because there was a lack of training information online. 20 years later, we continue with that because we have over information of content online. So at Elite FTS, we filter that information down to be able to provide you with the best information you need as a strength athlete, coach, recreational lifter, or washed up meathead. Content's changed over the years. So we used to have tons of blogs, tons of articles and such. Now we have the Table Talk podcast, we have articles, we have ebooks, and we have webinars and all kinds of other information on the site. So head over to elitefts.com, click on the education tab, and you're gonna find more articles than you know what to do with, but use the search queue and you'll find what you need.
And I tell him, like, I want to be, a football strength conditioning coach at the college level. And he says, that's great. We don't really have a great relationship with the strength staff. And the reason being is we've sent kids there before and they work, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and they don't feel like they've gotten much out of it. And what I think was happening is they were sending kids who didn't have a great work ethic. Because you're going to get out of, that experience. Like you're not walking into that experience expecting, somebody to hold your hand the whole time. And I knew that. But he said, so we don't have a great, relationship with them right now. How about we table that? Let's get your feet wet. You just moved here. We have a new, internship set up with a high school across town. It's a new guy. He's awesome. Go meet with him. See what he has to say. If that doesn't work out, we'll do the football thing. I go meet with him. He's great. He brings me on as, an intern. We have to basically start a program, from the ground up. And I very quickly found out that I just liked working with high schoolers. It just felt like where I needed to be.
And how was that program set up when you came into it?
So there wasn't much. They essentially had the weight room open and somebody supervising it, but there was nobody, giving kids, any sort of plan.
So this was the full high school. It wasn't the sports side of the high school.
Yeah. And it was primarily, football players there, but our goal was to get as many of the kids involved as possible with this, after school, and he would do stuff before school with them as well, within the program. And,
so this wasn't in school, like as a gym class elective. No. Okay. So it was full strength and conditioning.
Yep. I think
for those that wanted to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he might have taught one strength and conditioning class throughout the day because he was a PE teacher there as well. He wanted to start, a program after school for it. The athletic department there wanted this to be a thing. They understood the importance of it. Wisconsin's weird in terms of this. They understand that this should exist, but they haven't figured out a way to actually pay the people the right way to make it happen. So they're in this weird kind of, spot right now where they understand the importance, but they don't really understand the importance yet.
What about it did you like? Because you're dealing with high school kids, which is an interesting demographic because they're all over the spectrum as far as maturity. But at the same time, they kind of want to be there because it's an after school thing. So you're eliminating a lot of the issues that you would have if it was a class per se. So what about it made you think this is the demographic I want to stay with?
The age group presents a very unique opportunity for growth. You look at a 9th grader versus a 12th grader, same person, completely different person.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And you'll see, the same thing, as they go into college, that age gap, you'll see a lot there too. But I think with everything that's going on in their body physiologically, if you can put together an incredibly sound, program with them, you can get a lot out of them. And that's, I think, once I realized that piqued my interest. And not only that, but going back to, my own experience, internally, and then, getting eventually, hooked up with this, counselor who just kind of humanized me. I think that internally drove me to want to work with kids as well. Cause at the end of the day, I know that, there are kids experiencing the same thing that I, live with. And lifting has done, more good for me than I think anything else has in terms of being able to deal with that and having somebody there who just gives a real shit about it, about the kids, I think is one of the most important things that you can do. Not just from, you know, an athletic development standpoint, like just being there for them as a person, I think is the most important thing.
Well, it can change their lives.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I can go back through my whole history and I can name the exact coaches or training partners that had pivotal impacts on my life. Most of the times they don't know,
Yeah.
you know, so I made it a point to make sure that they do know, because most of us as humans don't go back,
Yeah.
you know, and say, hey, by the way, you remember that time you were riding my ass? I still remember that. And it had a big impact. At the same time, it's like, hey, you remember the time you were riding my ass? I'd still like slap you in the fucking head about that. And so with that first internship, where are you at then in your powerlifting career?
So I think I had already done a push-pull or two just to kind of get my feet wet. And that's just what was available, you know, closest.
Sure.
You just jump in, and it made sense. Some were unsanctioned, you know, just to do it. And then when I got up, you know, moved up to Madison, I got involved with single ply. There was a group of guys that come in and bench, and, you know, they were in the shirts and whatnot, and it was just interesting.
So is this what, like 2015?
16, 17.
2016? Okay.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit after that. But yes, I dove into, you know, single ply and took to that pretty well. Did one meet with it, and then pasta pass hit, and decided, you know, if I was going to do the Arnold, because that, you know, that was I if I was going to do something, I wanted to do it, you know, well. So I dove into it pretty hard, and just set the goal of getting to the Arnold right away. And like I said, I qualified 275 in July. Arnold is in March. Realized that by, you know, mid-October, after using this pass, I was not going to be ready for, you know, 275, and my strength was going up the whole time. So like, why would I want to drop down? And I had done, you know, everybody tells you not to, but, you know, I had done a push-pull. There was a wobble up, push-pull up there that I did a, you know, weight cut from like 294 down to 275 just to see if I could do it. You know, I was just stupid and young, and I was like, okay, well, let's do it. It was a terrible experience. But
well, it would impact, I'm going to assume it impacted your bench, but did it impact your pull?
I hit fucking lifetime PRs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I went in, that might have actually been, so I did a weight cut for both of those meets that I did single ply. So that Wobble meet, I think, was in April. And that there was a UPA meet that I used to qualify for the Arnold in July. And I did a weight cut for both of them. I think I benched 600 in both of those meets. I went for a PR in July and dropped it on my neck. They caught it, but, it definitely affected my performance on it. You know, because I didn't know that IVs existed or anything.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know that was an option. So I'm just sitting there trying to pound Pedialyte afterwards. And, you know, you dehydrate your body enough and you put stuff in quick enough, it's not going to stay in.
Comes right back out.
So, I decided at that point, you know, I just got to go 308. So I reached out to Dan, the XPC, and I said, hey, I'm only 25 pounds off the 308 qualifier. And he said, nope, you got to do another one to qualify. I said, okay, fair enough. So I jumped in multiply, bought an LUP, some Predators, and then a SDP, and got into a meet in December. I just barely made it through, but I qualified for it, and then went to the Arnold and did fine there.
Now, at this point with the powerlifting, is this now a higher priority?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where would you say it is at that time? Like, because you're still working. Actually, you're still working on your master's, right?
Yeah.
Right. So is it above that, or is the education still higher?
The education is still higher, because I think at the time it was still fairly early on. It's still, you know, first semester or two with this. I still think that I'm going to end up with collegiate, you know, athletics. So, you know, master's is still number one priority, and I don't think powerlifting ever jumped above it. I still think, you know, you know, at the end of the day, like I could pull powerlifting completely out and I still have so much else in my life that exists that like defines me, that like powerlifting is not the one thing that has always been like it. Now I have no idea what I'd do with my time without it.
Yeah.
It's not something I ever planned to walk away from, but I've sat down and thought, you know, come to terms with, okay, if this just disappears, I'm okay with that. Like I've come to terms with it. It's not what I would like, but,
But you were thinking that from the start.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've maintained that thought process the whole way through.
Yeah. Cause I started lifting as a way to disassociate from other stuff. So it's always been more of a tool for me because I enjoy the process.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of people that will do that identity then becomes their identity.
Okay. Yeah.
Where you see what I'm saying? Where you've able to keep that is not your identity, you know, but something that you like to do.
Yeah.
Which is, it's actually admirable. You know, because we've seen people that are on the other end of that, right? It becomes their full identity, then they no longer do it. And it's like, who the fuck am I? You know, what is this? You know, throughout this whole process, you're still, and I guess, you know, the counselors and knowing that you're dealing with depression kind of helps ground that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you're aware of the fact, if I let this become my whole identity, this is going to be a real problem because there's already a problem. There's already a ball and chain I'm lugging around.
Yeah.
I don't need to make it weigh 5 times as much. You know, you're trying to figure out how to pick the ball up and walk with it instead of drag it.
Yeah. I mean, God forbid that becomes the only thing that I care about. And I go spend 2 more years bombing out of meats.
Yeah.
Like, where the fuck do I go from there? So yeah, I mean, it was never the thing, but it was a big thing.
Yeah.
And it still is. But, and I think my focus on it has shifted, you know, over the years here where like, now I do it because I enjoy it. I enjoy the process far more than getting ready for a meet. You know, that 8 weeks leading into a meet is just like why is this so stressful? This doesn't need to be this stressful. And I still like doing meets, but I've got one coming up in like 2.5 weeks here. But at this point, I look at it more of a way to get even more out of my high school athletes because I'm very much a believer of like, I think you need to put your money where your mouth is, at least at some point as a coach. And that allows me to say, hey, like, we're both suffering right now. I know where you're at, and they see me, you know, go through my process. That's, you know, similar to theirs, and do well. And it motivates them even more, you know, to know that, okay, well, like he's actually doing this shit too.
So at what point then did the conjugate approach to training come into the picture?
When I got to Madison, you know, when I moved up there, I kind of had to relook at, you know, how my training was going because I moved to a new city. I didn't really know many people. I knew the gym owner because we had traveled up there. I lived about 1.5 hours away from it, from Madison. So I'd go up there fairly regularly. So I knew him. But he wasn't my training partner. So I was training, you know, basically by myself. So I needed to be able to kind of switch things out and just do what was available to me when I went in. And
are you're multiply this time?
So I was raw when I moved there. Then I got kind of hooked up with these guys on the weekends, who were, you know, doing their single ply stuff. And I jumped into single ply and I picked up, you know, a handful of training partners, and they were actually ones who bought me my first pair of Predators. Because, you know, this whole time I was learning, I knew enough to put together a training program. So I said, hey, can you guys just let me train you? Let me just handle things. So I started doing that for them. And, you know, as a thank you, they picked up, you know, a pair of Predators for me. And that was kind of my gateway into multiply. On top of, you know, putting on weight and just.
No, but that adds another layer if you're trying to find a place to train.
Yep.
You know, of briefs, whatever.
Yep.
But you start dealing with bench shirts and suits.
Yep.
Then is that kind of what you find yourself in, this weird situation that you have to train in multiple different places to be able to get help?
So.
Or spotters?
The gym was always very busy. The owner was always there. So he helped out, you know, quite a lot. He was a single ply lifter. So he understood stuff. And then, you know, the guys who benched on the weekends would come in and help, you know, once they'd come in, you know, once a week in the evenings when I'd have to go in and train. and help bench when we needed that. And then we just kind of figured it out as we went along. I'd watch YouTube videos and, okay, that looks like how I should do things. And I just try it. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. And that's kind of how my training has always been. As I started to shift into, especially away from, following a very rigid program to something like Conjugate, where there's a lot of moving pieces and you have the autonomy to kind of just move them around where you need them to. I just started experimenting a lot with my own training. And when I would train other people at the time, I would go with stuff that I really knew would probably work out. But my own training, it was just, and I've said it before, it's like throwing darts in the dark. I know the general direction. I know if at some point I'm going to hit a bullseye. So
you're N equals 1 in the top hierarchy of this experiment.
Yeah. And some things pay off, some things don't. There's a lot, like, I post a lot of stuff online. There's 10 times the amount of, videos on my phone where I will not post them online because they will not be helpful to anybody. But it gave me the opportunity to go through something stupid enough to figure out that it was not going to work for anybody else.
So was that the part about Conjugate that you first fell in love with, that you had more autonomy to be able to play with different things, to be able to see? And I ask because I think people kind of gravitate towards different programs based upon the level of their ability to handle uncertainty. Like some people that have to have certainty across the board probably do really well on just SBD 3 times a week, and that's all it ever is. And they know exactly what the progression is going to be for the next 3 fucking years. And it's the same repetitious crap all over the place. Where other ones that thrive more in that uncertainty area need variation. And you might be able to have insight on this with the kids. I think sometimes you can fuck up. You can put them in the wrong thing. So even if it is the best Conjugate program in the world, but you got somebody that needs so much certainty, it just won't work because they're not going to think it's going to work, and vice versa. Somebody that's ADHD can never fucking do anything, and you ask them to do the same thing 2 weeks in a row, there's a big ask. Where though with the Conjugate were you able to, because at some point, especially those that are programming Conjugate and you have Conjugate Strong and all this, there's some point where it all just clicks. It's like, this makes sense, just from the loosely use the word science side, right? Because it is what it is. I mean, there's some certainties that are across the board, but there's so much variety and ability and training and so many different inputs that it's really hard to kind of say this is exactly what it should be. And when did that click for you?
So I spent, I don't know how many hours listening to like the original set of like Westside podcasts. That's just anytime I got in my car, that's exactly what got put on. And I just listened through them over and over again, trying to get as much information out of them as possible. And, going through that process, I think was the catalyst at the time where I was like, okay, this is one, how I want to train, but two, like all of these pieces, when they're presented this way, really just line up well, with what I want to do. And, from a powerlifting standpoint, it works well because I like training to be really interesting. So it gives me the opportunity to just do new things quite often. And I initially fell into a trap of doing new things way too often. So that, my attitude towards that and my approach has changed dramatically from when I first started, diving into Conjugate versus where I'm at now. But from an athlete training standpoint, when we break it down, approaching getting athletes better, it just makes sense from a standpoint that all training that we do in the gym is general. And Conjugate just allows us to get specific physiological adaptations with anything that day. So if I just want them to get strong, it doesn't really matter what bar we're using We just need to work up to a certain effort level and we will get stronger. We need to do that consistently, and I can add in, different variations, even if it's just on a straight bar. We can do pin squats, we can do pause box squats, we can do free squats, and there's 3 weeks right there of just things that we can run basically indefinitely, because at that, at the age level that I'm at, like if we're just consistent and I can get a consistent effort on them and we just fine tune their ability to express their strength by, adjusting small things form wise, we can run that for fucking 4 years and they'll be fine. And that's essentially how I run things with them now. But that approach has evolved, over the last 6-7 years of working with high schoolers, where initially I went in and I was like, okay, we can just do everything and anything. And then I just, when I got with, the school that I'm at right now, I told myself, I said, okay, you need to reel it in just a little bit more here. So I sat down and I just wrote out a movement inventory, and I said, this is what we're sticking with for the first 2 years. We run, 4-week waves on our accessories. We have 6 different max effort upper variations, and they do a max effort box squat, a max effort deadlift, and then we have 2 block pulls in there. And then we just alternate, speed work every other week on that. So there's not a ton of variation outside of their, accessories. And even their accessories are all super basic, with them. Cause like I can have a kid do a single arm dumbbell row for years on end. And if they're not maxing out our dumbbells, they're just going to keep getting stronger. Just yeah. And I'll change it. We switch from a landmine row to a single arm dumbbell row to, we did gorilla rows this last month. It's just basic stuff.
So the kids that are in the weight room, just to stay on the high school kids, hard question to answer, but I think you can kind of get pretty close. What is the compliance? What's the consistency and compliance? Are you able to build something that's 4 days a week, or does it have to be 3 days a week?
We go 5.
So it's 5 days a week?
The high school that I'm at right now is unique. It is a fairly affluent area in Milwaukee. It is on average the healthiest school I have ever been in. Just like, I can ask any single one of my kids to go run a mile and they'll be back in under 6 minutes. Like, not a problem. They'll just say, okay. And not only that, they won't question it. They'll say, okay, be right back. I just have to tell them, jump, and they'll do it. So from a compliance standpoint, it has been a cakewalk to get these kids to do exactly what they need to do. And the ones that come in and they push it hard every single month. I mean, I wish I had a better way to look at my data with them. But I'm updating, 50 different data points every week on them. And, it's just crazy. The progress, even within just a single month, that these kids will, go through. I sat them down, we had talked about nutrition, like you need to be eating enough, you need to be recovering enough here, and you need to be training hard. And the kids just said, okay, we'll do it. And it's been absolutely, awesome.
That's great.
So it's, and that might be isolated, because I know not even every school that I've been at has been that way. But I've got like the perfect storm for just, to be able to run this. Just high level of athleticism. They understand their bodies well. They take, coaching and critique really well, and it's amazing. So.
Not heard that before.
I mean, it's only good things to say about them.
Yeah. So I assume weekends are off.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would Monday be if you were to generalize that day?
So Monday is our squat day.
Max effort, dynamic.
So it switches back and forth. So one week will be, so we essentially run, what would that be? They do, it'll be like a top 5 the first week. And I give them an aiming point, percentage wise. I say, hey, if you can hit between 80 and 90% today, you're good to go. The next week they'll drop down and they'll hit dynamic work with bands on their box squat. The following week, they'll do a top 3. Next week is dynamic work. That 5th week, they go back up to a top 5, dynamic work again the following week. And then we finish out that. They have the opportunity, if they're feeling good, I don't force it because I want them confident with the decision, they can take a new top single. So we are only maxing out our squat every 8 weeks. So every 2 months, I let them.
Okay. So it's basically 2 cycles, yep. And then the ability to be able to do that, and the max effort is alternating on those days. So on that day, if that's a priority, we can talk about warm-ups, I suppose, later, but if that's the priority, the main thing, then how's that training session progress through that training day? So if that's the main thing, what would be the secondary? How long do you have them for? Is there a time cap?
Not really. The kids will get through things in about an hour, though.
Okay.
So I get to the school at 3. I open the weight room up at 3:30, and then I am there with the high schoolers until 6, and then I've got a middle school group that comes in until 7 after that.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. The off-season kids can come in at pretty much any time throughout that. They come in, they can get their work done. Most of them are going to show up right after school. And like I said, they'll get through it about an hour.
Okay.
And so if we're squatting, there's typically going to be a hinge movement after it. So we'll do some sort of, RDL. And I keep them fairly simple. We do a single leg landmine, we do a sumo stance RDL, we do a normal, just conventional stance RDL. And we just
what would be the rep range that you're looking at for the secondary movement?
So we waive that. So I keep the accessories the exact same for the entire month. So those 4 weeks of, that cycle. And we'll typically start, 8 to 12 to start, and I just kind of cut off a rep or 2 every week.
So the accessories start right after the main thing. Yep. All right. And then how many accessories are going to be in there for them?
Depends on the day and depends on how difficult I think things will be. So for example, like this last, cycle that we were going through, they had normal RDLs, and then I threw in a tempo goblet squat afterwards. And by that 3rd or 4th week, that tempo goblet squat, it's just a 5 count eccentric, because what I'm battling is the kids are so explosive, they don't know how to slow things down. So I'll intentionally just add tempos onto things, because if we're looking at it from, like a purely hypertrophy standpoint, I just want more time under tension with them. So I'm adding, like, all of our box squats are paused because they just hit the box as hard as they can and go up. And I'm like, all right, guys, we need to fix this up. So I had a pause, and within like 10 minutes, everybody's box squat was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And that goes back to, them just being really good athletes. And they take, coaching really well. But so, the tempo goblet squats, those are a little more difficult. So I'll pull back on the accessories that after that. They'll have on their lower body days at least 1 ab movement, 1 upper back movement, typically like just quick pull-ups, because kids should be able to do pull-ups.
Yeah.
So we do pull-ups quite often, and then like banded leg curls, and then it's either something for the ankles or adductors.
Okay.
And that's about it. That's our lower body day.
So then you move on to Tuesday. What is that? So
Tuesday is a max effort bench day, and we cycle through, what is it? It's got to be 5 or 6 movements here. So we do a full range bench press. They get to do that once every 2 months. Now they do. Originally, because they were getting really good gains, I was letting them do it once every month. But now it's every 2 months. So we do a full range bench press. We do a 1 board, a 2 board, a 3 board, and a floor press. So 5. I feel like there was one more in there. I threw in a reverse mini band bench on them last month. I don't think I'm going to keep it in.
Now, does this stay throughout the whole block? Does that stay, or does it go from max effort 1 week to dynamic the next, like you do with the squat?
So that's going to be max effort every week,
all the time.
Yep. And what I'll do is I'll go back and forth. So if week one would be a 3 board, week 2 would be the floor press, week 3 would be a 2 board, week 4 would be like a full range. And then we just cycle through the boards every other week, and then I flip back and forth between the floor press and the full range.
Right. So you're going basically from full range, partial range, full range, partial range. That way it satisfies their ego too, right? Because they're able to lift more weight. And then once we get into the accessories there, how does that break down?
So I have to be a little creative with it, because that's typically where we're going to run into issues space-wise now. I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of kids who really want to be in the weight room, and that's great. But I have a finite amount of space, and I'm in the process of, convincing the school to give me more money, and we're close to get some more equipment here. But so they'll typically do some sort of dumbbell press afterwards, whether that's overhead, whether it's a floor press, whether it's an incline dumbbell bench, because especially if we're doing partial range work, I want full range on the dumbbells to make sure that the shoulders are just staying happy, healthy, and strong in every position.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
The floor press is only in there if I don't have benches, because sometimes we have to take all of our benches by our dumbbells and put them in the back half of our racks to make sure everybody can bench. And I typically try to stay away from the dumbbell floor press, because now we're at a point where, like, our strongest guys are maxing out our dumbbells on them, and I'm not going to have him take the 90s for 25 reps. Just maybe not. You know what I mean. But yeah, we'll typically look for a full range, dumbbell press after that, a heavy row variation. And these all get, progress basically the same way that, the RDLs do. We start with, 12s. The dumbbells, I might push them a little bit, higher in volume, up to about 15. But we'll progress them down, and they're, by about week 3 or 4 for sure, what I'm asking them to essentially do is a top set on those. So, that may take 2 sets if they're warmed up really well. And, I say, give me a top set of 6 to 8. And they understand that concept well now, where I say, you're just looking for, I want you to strain with something, 6 to 8, and then you're done, move on. And that works out really well. But other times, if we're looking for like straight hypertrophy, I'll give them 3 or 4 sets of, 10 to 15 reps. Find something that you strain with there, and then move through them.
So you have the dumbbells, and then what happens after that?
So we do, like I said, the dumbbell presses, we'll do some sort of row. We've got, what is it? We've got a full set of, it's not a full set. We've got 35s, 45s, and 55s. They redid the weight room a few years before I got there, fat bells. So those come in handy for a lot of our kind of mid-range strength guys for rows. But we'll do, like I said, a heavy row variation, and that could be on a barbell, it could be in a landmine setup, it could be with the dumbbells. And then afterwards, we will work into higher rep range work, shoulders, dumbbell rollbacks. That's typically where I'm looking from like sets of 12 to 20 on that stuff, because we shift primarily over to kind of just like straight hypertrophy, and then kind of dip our toes into the muscular endurance, tissue capacities type stuff, and then we'll finish with straight tissue capacity. I may have them grab 5 8-pound dumbbells. You have 100 lateral raises and 150 banded push downs. You can break them down however you want, but I want you to get them done as quick as possible.
All right, so then we move into Wednesday.
So Wednesday's our deadlift day. In a perfect world, that would be a GPP sort of recovery day, but my attendance drops.
That's where I thought it was going to go.
I wish, but my attendance drops off on Fridays, so I want to make sure that we hit the meat and potatoes, and and with that in mind, I have a conversation with the kids quite often. I talk to them as people, and if they're not feeling good, I just say, pull back today. That's fine. But because they are tight together. In a perfect world, we'd have, about 72 hours in between, lower sessions. Kids are highly adaptable. We haven't had too many issues with it, but I do have those conversations with them quite regularly, that if we need to pull back, they feel very comfortable just coming and telling me, hey, I'm not feeling it. And I say, okay, we'll just move it to next week. Not a big deal.
Yeah. Now, with that, are you only pulling back that main movement, but the accessories will stay? Usually.
And I'll say, and that's only if we're doing like heavy deadlifts that week. And that will oppose. So we'll do dynamic squats and heavy deadlifts. So I'm not doubling them up on that. But we'll go back and forth between dynamic effort deadlifts. We've got band pegs. We just set them up. They have, 8 to 10 sets of 1 to 3, depending on where we're at. And that volume will change based on accessories and how hard I want them to push them afterwards. Because if we're doing that pull to start the day, that's where I'm typically going to push them with kind of a push, a heavier kind of, goblet or squat afterwards.
So the accessories that are going to fall on Wednesday are kind of like they are on Monday.
Yep.
Are the movements the same, or are you swapping the movements out for the Wednesday?
Those will be different.
They'll be, but the same movement patterns.
Yeah, but it'll kind of oppose the schedule that we had on Monday.
Sure.
So Monday we start with a squat and we move to a hinge. Wednesday we're going to start with a hinge type movement, and then depending on how good they are at getting into position on deadlifts. And then we'll start with, we'll do a squat after that.
All right. So then Thursday, I'm going to assume you're back to the bench.
Yep. So that's okay.
And that would be the dynamic.
Yep.
Now with the kids, what exactly is the dynamic effort bench?
So we flip back and forth. So week 1 is typically going to be a true dynamic effort bench, assuming they have enough control and strength for me to put micro bands on the bar. If they don't, it becomes a 5x5.
Okay.
And
okay. Explain to people why I just asked you that question, because elaborate.
Well, if you can't produce enough force for the dynamic effort method to matter in the first place, you just need to get stronger. And that's actually how I handle, new kids coming into the weight room. They'll do the same thing everybody else is doing, but instead of, working up to that, top triple for the day, I just say, hey, you're going to do the same exact thing, but I want you to just do a 5x5. You can continue to add weight as long as things look good. Find something that's a little hard today, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
But so
because it's essentially, if they're not ready for it, it's gonna look like a fish that you just pulled out of the water and threw it on a dock. Yep. They're just gonna look like a clusterfuck.
Yeah. So introducing that is, we start with the timing, of the workout. So it's okay, if we're gonna do 8 sets of 3, we got the timer out. You're going every minute on the minute, like no bands or anything. You're going to learn how to just move through this quickly. I want you to apply as much force into the bar as possible. You're trying to punch it through the ceiling. And then once they have that basic control and that setup, mastered, then I say, okay, we're going to add the bands.
Now, have you found with the bands, assuming the tension is not stupid, that helps them with their ability to learn compensatory acceleration and stabilization?
Yes. But again, these kids, they're so athletic and explosive just in general that they love it. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So,
it's usually the inverse of
Yeah. I mean, it's getting them to actually slow down has been the hardest piece. Like I can throw the bands on and they're like, this is awesome. But what also helped is, the coach that was there prior had introduced a good amount of these concepts, just not in the same sort of depth that I had. So there was a really good base of understanding of like, okay, this is beneficial. The kids didn't really fight it much at all. So that helped.
All right. So then Friday is going to be where the GPP day is.
That's the hardest day of the week.
That's why they're compliant. Yeah. Well, first off, you had to switch things around because the compliance is going to be less, right? Which makes complete sense. But having that be a GPP day is going to make the compliance even lower.
It started that way.
Yeah.
And then the kids bought into it really, really well, and they like the challenge now. And I'll be honest, there's not as much, periodization happening with that. I revisit things, but that's kind of a day where I intentionally will try to push them, because I know they have the next 2 days off. I'll intentionally try to push them pretty damn hard. I mean, just from a purely, let's just do hard shit today.
All right. So you're not looking at this so much as a recovery day. You're looking at it as like an anaerobic endurance.
The initial portion of it. There is stuff built into the end of it. Like we don't have reverse hypers, but if I take a BOSU ball and put it on a bench and have them, lay on top of it, we can get a similar effect, or we get some sort of traction by doing hanging leg raises. We do a lot of those too. And I'll add in a ton of banded work, but a lot of it is just, I want that low to kind of mid-level work capacity to get pushed as hard as possible, as often as possible. And they're in shape. Like I said, they're very athletic. They're very in shape year round. I can tell any single one of them to go run a mile. but it's that mid-range kind of muscular endurance that they've been missing. But they've bought into these Friday sessions really well. And I think we actually peaked on our attendance like 2 weeks ago. Just like I'm looking around, I've got no room left. Like the kids are in there. They know when they see sleds on the board that it's going to be a bad day, but they don't leave. I mean, they walk up there and they go, oh, shit. And they get straight to work. And I love that. I mean,
now what's interesting here with this template is if they can jump in at any time. So if you have a multi-sport athlete, but you may only be able to actually have them as like full-time weight room people for 8 to 10 weeks, and even like 3 weeks here season, or 2 days for football, whatever the fuck it's going to be. And then here, I don't see 1 week in here where you would actually have to bring anything down to accommodate when they come in, because at any point during these 2 blocks that could lead to that. I guess the max week would be if that would be a bad time for somebody that's just going to jump right in. But outside of that, and that is the opportunity to do a max, right? Yep. Because it still would be that week 1 of block number 1 repeated over again. Block A, I suppose, would be in there. So it accommodates everybody at any period of time, no matter where they are in their sports schedule, which is what a high school strength coach basically should be doing, right? Yep. And it would also accommodate if they have to miss a day here nor here. All bases are covered unless they're just missing weeks on end. Yeah. And if they're missing weeks on end, it's usually because of the sport practice. And hell, even if they make it in 2 days, they're still covered.
Yep. But and with that in mind, though, I have a 2-day schedule as well. Because I have teams that will schedule, specific times. Yeah. There's good camaraderie that happens with, teams that come in all together. Like lacrosse season is just starting right now, and our girls lacrosse team is at a really strong showing. They come in Tuesdays and Thursday nights from 5 to 6 with me. But what they're doing is essentially just a condensed version of the same off-season program. So they're doing all of the same movements, at least the ones that I found that were most important. So like with their upper body day, I'm gonna look at both of those upper body days, and I'm gonna say, okay, this press was the most important. This row was the most important out of the ones. This, these next accessories, and I'll condense those into 1 day, and they'll flip back and forth. Every other week, 1 heavy week, 1 dynamic week, and we'll flip back and forth on their squat or their deadlift. 1 heavy week, 1 dynamic week, and they just flip back and forth that way. So we're still covering all the bases. It's just we took this 4 or 5 day schedule and now spread it out over the course of 14 days, 10 days.
Now with this demographic, you don't necessarily have to worry about teaching them how to auto-regulate their ability to manage fatigue throughout the sessions because it's kind of built in.
Somewhat. We do have to have conversations sometimes. I think I have to have the inverse conversation more often where I'm like, did you get anything out of that set? Okay. Like they get done and I'm like, okay, well, go get, if they use a 40-pound dumbbell, I say, we both know you're capable of using a 70-pound for this. Do another set. And they just say, okay. They may say it with a little bit of an attitude, but they'll do it. Like they understand the importance of it. But, the thing that I, stress with them as I talk with them is like it's got to be difficult, for it to make you better. Like we have to strain to get stronger, and they've bought into that really well.
Well, you're kind of in this amazing situation, and you came into it because they already had a base. How long have you been doing it with this school?
We're coming up on a year now.
So coming up on a year, how are you maintaining that culture with them?
It goes back to just treating them like humans.
The reason I'm asking this is because coaches can walk into something like this, and if they suck as a coach and they can't connect with them as humans, they will destroy something that a previous coach has spent years to build that base on. So you would say that's the number one most important thing.
The first thing that I'm asking a kid is not what are you doing, it's how are you doing. That's just like, how was your weekend? Like I don't know what time it is. My assistant's currently running a session right now with our kids. And I'm sure I'll get an update and things will be going well right now because we're on spring break right now. So we've got the weight room open the next, 4 days here, just in the morning for the kids who are still in town. But, when I get in tomorrow, I'm driving straight back to, Milwaukee when we get done here. Right when I get in, the first kid that I'm going to see, how are you doing? Every single day. I mean, that is the first thing. It's not let's get to work. It's just, how was your weekend? And that I think that has to be the priority if you want to get consistent output from the kids. I mean, you come into a new place there, any sort of change like that, the kids are going to buy in to some degree. But if they don't know that you care, if they don't believe you care, they're not going to continue to buy in. And one of my big things is, I've had other teachers, I've had admins, I've had parents who say, why do you show up to so many things? I cannot expect the kids to buy into what I do in the weight room with them if I don't buy into what they do on the court or the field. So I will try to get to as many things as possible because at the end of the day, that's what the goal is, obviously to make them really good humans, but, to see them excel at the sport that they want to do well at. So I better be there. That's just what it is. And not only that, I enjoy watching them. It's fun. I don't really watch sports at home, with the exception, well, now Wisconsin's out of the tournament, so what does it matter anymore? But, that's where I get my entertainment. I don't watch much TV. It's just, I go to work and I watch kids play sports.
All right. Yeah. So let's take this to the next level. So now with your training, right? Because that would be basic conjugate GPP, right? The introductory level. So with your own training, and it's evolved over time. So let's just go with, you said you're going to meet this 2 weeks out. Yep. So before we get into how long would you consider your peak period? Like 4 weeks, 6 weeks? So
it used to be about 8. I'd run, I initially tried to run the Westside Circumax thing and it didn't work out well for me. There wasn't enough specificity in it with the box squatting and all the bands. Yeah. And I realized very quickly that if I wanted to get better at the thing, I needed to do the thing. Yeah. And that has changed often, just based on what I think I need. I have a fairly standard approach I use with my athletes. Yeah. If they're raw, we use some chain to lead into, that period, that peak where we have to, leading into the taper, we're trying to overreach.
So it's just generally like 6 to 8 weeks out if you're including a taper. Yeah. All right. So we're outside of that. Yeah. Right. So whatever you want to say, off season. Yeah. Right. So how does the off season, how's that laid out?
So Sundays I train with, the group at Wolfpack. Most weekends, I'll just squat whatever they're squatting. And then my accessories, because we've got a fairly large group, I oftentimes don't get accessories done that day because I have obligations outside of the gym to take care of.
Now, would you call this max effort squat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is that always the squat, or are you using different variations, different movements on that day? Keep in mind, we're not talking the prep phase.
Yeah. The bar will change. Yeah. Box, no box.
Got it.
Off season, I'm typically staying in briefs only. And whether I'm free squatting or box squatting will, influence which briefs I get into. Because if I'm just box squatting, I will wear a less aggressive pair of briefs, just as a self limiter. And then, if I'm free squatting, I have a little bit more aggressive pair of briefs just to support me a little bit better in the hole there. But yeah, bar will change, box versus no box. They tend to squat a little bit more often without a box, so I will have to force my box in there.
Now, where are you going up with this? Is it 1 to 3 or
1 to 4?
1 to 4.
1 to 4 usually.
And you're basing that on how you feel.
Yep.
Right. So this is where we get into this big auto regulation, type of conversation. Where do you think it generally falls?
I prefer to do ones because
Yeah.
I can just be done after one.
Yes, yes.
And then I like pushing my accessories really hard. But like
Yeah.
I said, I don't always get my accessories in on Sunday because we've got a big group, and big groups tend to move slow. And by the time we get done squatting, I've got to go do stuff. So I'll typically go on the next day, and Mondays will be a GPP focused day.
Well, I don't want to jump there yet.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So how do you determine when it's going to be a 1, a double, or a 4? Right. Because I assume you're going in with the intent of it being 1 unless your body's just trashed. And then you start, are you making that decision before the movement's made, or are you making the decision during the movement? And if both are happening, what do you think the percentage is of that being regulated during that day?
So I'm more often going to stick with the ones. Because I do feel like I have a pretty good handle on my recovery, my nutrition, my sleep, my conditioning. So rarely do I feel just terrible going in. But I also know, doing this long enough, that more times than not, the days where I feel the worst are actually going to be the ones where I perform the best. And whether or not that's just purely, psychological, because I expected so much less out of myself and, was actually just fine, I don't know. But if I go in and I'm just a little dehydrated, my hamstring acting up, and then I'll just pull back, and sometimes I may work up to, if I had to put like an RPE on it, like a 7, and I go, okay, that's enough for the day. Like that's what I got. I know if I push any harder, it's not going to be productive work.
So how many of these would be that RPE of a 10?
Very few.
Okay, cool.
Very few.
All right. So averaging between, say, 7 and a 9.
Yeah. Okay. I try to get as close to that, like 9, maybe 9.5 without crossing over it as possible.
Explain to me why. Why not a 10 all the time?
So when I first got into Conjugate, I thought it was an 11 every week. Because you try that and you start getting stronger, and you very quickly, well, I don't know about very quickly, but you eventually realize that it's not sustainable. You cannot keep that level of intensity up and recover at the rate you need to. And not only that, I don't think, there is of course, merit to pushing it there, here and there. There will be days that, I ask my athletes, I say, this is the day that we're going to push as hard as you can. And I'll do that occasionally too, but it's not sustainable to do it every week. You can't recover from it. And not only that, but I think keeping it below that kind of 9.5, between, 7 and 9 there, allows us enough intensity to continue to push the strength, but not so much that we can't focus on and, fine tuning things in the process.
Yeah.
And I think if we push, consistently to that 10, things break down at 10s. They break down a lot quicker. And if we're going to maximize training adaptation here, we absolutely have to consider the psychological benefits of hitting really solid reps all of the time. So that's typically where I try to keep myself and my athletes, is just walk a fine line with it, make sure things look really good. Make sure you strain a little bit. If you get a little out of position, let's figure out why, and let's just continue to focus on making sure that line is as tight as possible.
Okay. Now, in a perfect world, your accessories would fall immediately after that. But you said earlier you'll kick those off into Monday because of time.
Yeah.
And so what does that Monday then look like? Because if that max effort was done at that 9, you may kind of feel like you got run over by a truck on that Monday, or you may feel fine. So that could be one of two different things. So out of those one or two different things, what does that look like?
So it's not heavy compounds at all. I won't put 2 days like that back to back. I'll typically go in, if it's nice enough out, I can pull the sled. I like doing that. It's 10 minutes of that. 400 yards, depending on, how much weight I have on there. We need a new sled right now. The one we have is just gummed up with, they redid the blacktop at the gym I go to during the week. And it's got so much tar stuck underneath it that you put like a quarter on it and it just catches every step. But anyways, I like to pull the sled with it not being so nice out right now. I've been pushing a lot of...
Now with the sled, is it forward, backward? Is it...
Mostly forward.
Mostly forward.
Mostly forward.
All right.
My work capacity going backwards, and I knees are feeling good. I don't feel like I need the additional volume there. If I do program it in backwards sled drags, it's about a quarter of the volume that I would do forwards, and they're going to be on the same day.
All right.
But yeah, so sleds or kettlebell swings, and I've been doing a lot of work on like an Airdyne assault bike.
So this is recovery.
Yep.
All right.
And then if I need to push any accessories afterwards, I will, but I'll keep them to single joint work only, just for the volume, but try to do it in the least, kind of detrimental way possible to overall recovery. So I'll hop on, standing leg curl machine, just a seated leg extension, just super simple, just to get the volume on the muscles.
And easy to recover from.
Yeah, but nothing like compound. Like I'm not even trying to get on like a glute ham raise, because the intensity on that's going to be a lot higher than getting on a leg curl machine.
So basically just blood work.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So that's Monday, and then where does the bench fall?
So bench will be Tuesday. Some weeks. What we've been doing, because I've had access to spotters only on the weekends, is every other to every 3 weeks we'll actually bench after we squat.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just how it works out. I wasn't a huge fan of it initially, but that would
be your heavy bench too, right? Yeah. So basically both max efforts in one day. All right.
Yep. And
if that does not happen there, then Tuesday would end up being your speed day. Lighter.
No, so Tuesday would be if I bench heavy on Sundays, Tuesday becomes purely hypertrophy day.
Got it.
Yep. But if I don't bench heavy on Sundays, then I'll do a heavy raw max effort on Tuesdays.
I got it.
And that, like I said, every 2 to 3 weeks that, shifts around, and there's a lot of just like, okay, well, let's move all these pieces.
All right. So the only thing you're really moving though is going to be that main max effort movement, which is going to kick off.
Yeah.
And everything after, if the main movement is on Tuesday, everything after is accessories. There's not going to be a heavy 3 or 5 supplemental movement.
No.
Right. So now if it is on Tuesday and it is that max effort bench, is there a heavy secondary movement, or does it, like with your kids, just break off into the accessories?
So there's typically, but I don't push it any lighter than top 5 or 6 on that. And that would be, like a heavy, like JM presses or a variation of that.
Yeah.
That's just what I would throw in on right after the bench there. But I don't do that every week. That is something that I just don't periodize well, because that's purely going to be based off of how my shoulders and elbows feel just after, the previous few days. So I'll push it when my body says I can, and I'm very good about just, moving on to the stuff that doesn't bother it afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, because you are looking at a 1 day gap between Sunday from the squat. Or if the bench is on there, even more so. So that Tuesday can really almost end up being kind of like the Monday, but for upper body.
Yep.
Right. Based upon how you feel.
Yep.
Regulating that through. And then what would be Wednesday?
So Wednesday becomes a purely upper body GPP day. And I try to go in and get, 20, 25, maybe 30 minutes of just as many reps as I can. I will, there's a little bit of thought that goes into it, but I mean, it's fairly basic. I'll pick, 3, 4, 5 movements, just real light. Like this past week I did bamboo bar bench, real light, 10% of my 1 rep max, raw on bench. Did sets of 40 on that, jumped over to the pec deck, sets of 20 there, and then dumbbell front raises. We did 10 rounds. We got it done in like 23 minutes. It ended up being like 36,000 pounds of, volume. But I enjoy that. That's one of those days where it's like, it's just that monotonous work. It feels good. I'm getting a great pump. It's loosening up my shoulder. That first set on the bamboo bar feels like hell, after benching heavy the prior day, but by set, 4, 5, 6, it feels amazing.
So this is done as a circuit?
Yeah.
All right. Is there any rest between movements outside of just walking to the movement?
Nothing outside of walking to the movements.
Now, what about when the circuit 1 is complete?
Straight into circuit 2.
Right into circuit 2. So it's continuous movement throughout the whole time.
But that's if I set it up that way. So that's one of the ways that I'll run that GPP. Other days I will run more of, like interval training with it. So recently I've gotten very into tracking my heart rate on these GPP days because I just want to see what it does, but I also want it to sort of influence how I'm actually going into it. So like that Monday, if I'm doing kettlebell work, if I'm doing assault bite work, I will push it all the way up to like zone 4, zone 3, let it drop back down, start my next set. So I'm just going up and down because I like pushing it to that intensity level where you're out of breath, you start huffing and puffing. But I also think that if I can fine tune that process and just get more data to look at in terms of what's actually happening with my body, I can get more out of it, but I can also pay attention to the general underlying physiological kind of response to it and better control how my body responds to this stress. And I think that from that standpoint, that helps me control my emotional and, physiological response when I'm walking up to a heavy max effort squat. Cause I don't feel great right now. How do I get myself back to that? And that's that process that I like on those days where I look at my heart rate as this monitor where, okay, it's out of control right now. I can't breathe. Focus. Get it back to where it needs to be. So I'm training that quality as well on these GPP days. And I really like that.
Now, are you periodizing the actual total workload?
Generally,
this? No. So it's more the heart rate and the volume.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then with that day, is there any progression or any wave to it? Or is it just kind of like a straight?
I will wait. If I really, really like something, I'll waive it, or I'll do like an every other week type thing.
Okay.
So like this bamboo bar thing, this was the 3rd week of it. And we did, I started with 10 by 20, 10 by 30, and we finished with 10 by 40. Same weight on the bar. We just increased the volume, and I kept it at basically the same exertional intensity. It felt the same each week. So I'm whether or not the weight was, heavy enough to, be harder week to week by adding more volume, or I was just getting better. I don't know. But it felt easier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's still a progression.
Yeah.
If you have to check, double check the heart rate twice during the training session on week 1, to bring it back down, and then you don't have to do it at all on week 3, even if all variables are the same, it's better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what you're actually looking for. And then Thursday.
So Thursday is primarily deadlift day. So for the longest time I was doing, a traditional Westside split where I'd have a max effort and then I'd do both squat and deadlift. But as I got stronger, I had to pull it out because I just wasn't recovering. And so I will deadlift. About, 3 weeks out of the month, I'll do dynamic effort work. I'll just wave that up. We go, 45, 50, 55%. And if I feel good, I might push it up a little bit more. And then 1 week out of the month, I'll do a heavy just deadlift. Sometimes that's raw if I'm in the off season. Typically, if I'm a raw, I'm in a conventional stance. If I am, getting ready for a meet, it's always from the floor. And if I'm having trouble with the lockout, I may go a little bit heavier bands. If I'm having trouble just bracing in the bottom, it'll just be straight weight. And, more times than not, it's just a straight weight pull. Because I want that heavy pull to just be an opportunity for me to ensure that my form is staying on point. Because I strive to be the most technical lifter that I can be. So when I go to practice doing the thing, I want it to generally be the thing. That's it. When we look at motor learning, like we get better at the thing by doing the thing. So.
And then the accessories on that day.
that is the day where I will push my lower body accessories hard. And I'll choose a supplemental movement, right after, and I'll push it up to basically a top set, and I will try to wave that for 3 or 4 weeks. So I just got off of a wave of single leg Smith machine RDLs, dead stop RDLs, and they might be the hardest fucking thing ever. I mean, it's terrible. But I'm going to keep pushing them here quite often over the next year or so and see where things go. They hit like the hamstrings, like real high up into that tie in there. And that's exactly what I've been looking for. But yeah, I'll choose something like that after the deadlift.
Now with those movements that you're choosing that are like that, they're choosing based upon weak points that you're trying to bring up, but are you also choosing it based upon movements where the load would be lower?
Yeah.
So it's less overall systemic fatigue.
Yep. So I can push the strain.
Yeah.
There's self-limiters built in. So I ran a handful of waves of SSB front squats. I'm not going to automatically be able to put on 600 pounds of SSB front squats.
Well, even with the example you gave of the single leg Smith machine, you don't need a whole lot of weight on that.
Nope.
It's just a couple warm-up sets and you're probably already in the work sets.
Yep. So yeah, I like having the self-limiters kind of built into it because again, it allows me to push things to, a decent degree where I know I'm getting stronger, breaking it up, unilaterally. I know I'm getting stronger, but I'm not, spending more allowance than I've been given.
Yeah.
So.
And then Friday, I'm going to assume it's a recovery day.
Friday would be where I would put my dynamic effort upper if I don't feel beat up. If not, it'll just be an upper body pump day. And I'll just go in, and that's typically the day where if I know I'm feeling good, I will plan a session ahead of time. If I know I'm not feeling good, but I know I still need to go move, I'll go in and I'll just do whatever feels good. And typically, if I'm not feeling good, it means I grab some dumbbells, I move them a bit, I loosen up the rest of the upper body, and then I leave.
All right, and that's regulated by Wednesday.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then Saturday.
Completely off. I do nothing. So that's typically my big work day where I sit down and get most of my programming done. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting in the chair all day and looking at a computer.
Okay. Now we're going to go into peaking for a meet and you're going to change specificity.
Yep.
So a lot of what you just said, correct me if I'm wrong, is going to stay the same.
Yeah.
So after the first movement. So then how do you start to dial in the specificity of the squat, bench, and deadlift and the gear? So
personally, I will get on a straight bar for squat every other week.
Okay.
And the accommodating resistance on that will change, based on how I'm feeling, based on what I think I need. If I need a little bit more stability, we'll throw chains on. If I just need to push, we'll throw a little bit of bands on. If I'm having trouble picking heavy weight or I don't feel like my brace is on point, we'll throw a lot of bands on. And then how much gear I'm using will depend on, how well or how confident I am with the gear at that time. If I haven't really been pushing it, too hard in the gear in the off season and I've just been sticking in the briefs, I'm probably going to put, wraps on a little bit earlier. I'm probably going to put the straps up a little bit, earlier, a little bit tighter, just to kind of work those in. But I'm very much a minimum effective dosage type person, so I'm going to try to come from the bottom end on that rather than just overload all of that stuff right away. But when we free squat, it'll be on a straight bar, unless we have somebody whose shoulders are incredibly beat up, then we'll just get on a cambered bar and do a free squats there.
Now, when you're personally going into this, there's a difference between a training max and competitive max, right? So do you optimally, if that can be somewhere between the 10-15%, that would be great.
Yep.
Right. But you're dealing with a much higher squat, right? So we're talking, that's a lot of weight,
yep.
Right? How close do you broach where your second attempt may be in a meet in the training?
It truly depends on the day. I mean, I've squatted more in the gym than I ever have at a meet.
Okay.
And the day that I did that, the first thing I did was find my most mentally stable training partner and said, do I take another jump? Mm-hmm. And he said, no. And I said, okay, thank you. That's what I thought. But that would have been, second attempt right there, based on, a perfect day, that would have been a second attempt. If we do anything close to a third attempt, it's typically like with reverse micros, just to know we can hold it at the top, and, reverse micros at the bottom aren't taking any more than about 35 pounds off. It's just, we know what the tension is. And I think 35 pounds is probably the difference between a little bit bigger brace and breath and just not. It's one of those small things where I feel confident, if I can move it with the reverse micros, it's probably moving. Assuming I don't fuck anything else up.
How far out will be your last heavy squat?
Originally it was, for the longest time, it was 3 weeks, but I moved that to 2. I felt that the 3 weeks was too far out, and I felt deconditioned from the movement. Detrained. I didn't feel, I'd get underneath the bar to warm up at the meet, and I'd think that this doesn't feel right. So that'll be my last heavy squat will be, 2 weeks out, and then a week out, I'll take a few singles at 65% in just my briefs, more so as they're mental reps. I visualize, that day, there's just 3 singles. I move up to the bar exactly as I would as it, if it was each and every one of my attempts. And I get as tight as I would under, 650 as I would 1,000.
Now, sticking with the same topic, your training kind of leading into the meet, we covered the squat. So how does the bench peak and then deload?
Okay, so we will typically stay in our bench shirts, or I will, every 2 weeks. I may push that to every 3, if I feel really confident and if I'm feeling a little beat up, because it is quite difficult to touch in a bench shirt. And I think that, out of all the things we do, that is one of the things that can dig a hole quite quickly, especially if you fuck that up.
More so than the squat?
For me.
For no shit.
Yeah. I mean, I will spend 20 seconds trying to touch I'll just sit there. So the time under tension and the amount of effort, intensity that it takes for me to get that done.
That's interesting. Yeah. So what's your best squat in the meet?
1040.
1040. Yep. And then what was the best in the gym?
1055.
Usually for people, it's the squat, because when you start handing those loads over $1,000,
yep.
I know a lot of lifters, and actually, I think I might know why you're able to get away with that have to drop it back to like once a month, for the heavier. But if people go back and listen to what we are talking about on how that whole off season lays out, and then the GPP day especially, I think has a big role into that.
Yep.
Okay. So anyhow, back with the bench. So
yeah, well, so one of the big things I do is every time I get in the shirt, I have to get at least as low as a 1 board. Ideally, we go to a half board or even a touch. That goes back to, I want to be the most technical lifter I can be, because, the more things that I control within the lift, the better output I'm going to get. And that's one of the things that I try to preach with all my athletes is the more stable our system is, the better output we're going to get. And I think that's true with, we look at any sort of, system in general. We look like an engine. If we got an engine going out of control, if we just control it, we'll get better output from it. And the same thing, holds true with our lifts here. So the tighter I can be, the better controlled I can be, the better I can think my way through the process.
Well, there's another layer there too, for those that aren't familiar with multiply lifting, is it's a technical game with a very high strength component, where the raw lifting is like a strength game with a technical component. And I don't know any better way, unless you do, to explain that.
No.
Because any slight deviation, and you're not recovering.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Lifts over. Yep.
A slight deviation in a heavy raw lift, there's the ability with... I'm trying to make this so people can understand. You can recover, but yes, if any deviation that's probably more than like an inch in either, you're going to have a hard time, but in the raw, you might be able to grind it through. I would probably highly suggest, if you're super strong and you have that deviation, just let the spiders take it and don't struggle through it, because it will take a toll on your next attempt. And multiply, you can't, you're just fucked.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, with that being said, continue.
Yep. So we're always trying to get as close as possible with the touch, and that's not heavy. That we'll typically always try to aim for about what we're going to plan on opening with.
So you're purposely trying to touch with the lightest weight you possibly can. That's that technical part.
I don't want bench to be a source of stress when I go to a meet. There's so many other things that are stressful that I just want to walk out there and I want to be as confident as possible, just crushing my opener.
Well, the squat will also take a toll on your bench. So this is a very it's a very important ability.
Which is one of the reasons why initially I wasn't a fan of benching after we squatted, but I ended up liking it a lot because it gave me a very real-time snapshot of how I was going to perform on a bench press under the exact fatigue that I'm going to be, aside from the additional, mental terror that comes with the meet. But it gave me a much more accurate snapshot of how my strength was going to, actualize itself in the lift that I was going to have to do.
So the days in between the shirt, then, what are they?
In terms of what?
If you're using the shirt every other week, then there's those weeks between the shirt weeks. So
typically high board work.
Okay.
High board work with, chains or bands if I'm feeling it. Like, this past week we had an off week, so I just did a max 3 board.
So heavy, but easier to recover from.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, every other week we get in the shirt, and we will just kind of overload the board work after we hit that low. That touch, that half board, that one board. Once we hit that with about our opener weight, so I'm super confident with that, then I'll work up to, a 2 or a 3 board. And I don't do anything higher than a 3 board. I think it's, I'm sure there's merit for some people, but I can't find any for myself. At a certain point, I can put enough weight on the bar where it's great. I'm conditioning my forearms to hold it, but it's not something that's going to happen right now. So I just figured, let's just leave the 4 board on the ground and not touch it. But those I'll just kind of cycle back and forth between a 3 and a 2 board, and we get to that and this is where it changes based on the schedule that I have leading into the meet. So I'm just under 3 weeks out for the meet, so we're actually going to go back. We will squat and bench Wednesday night this week. So I'll go in, I'll hit my opener on my squat. Likely, if I feel really good, I'll take maybe a second attempt. I won't push up to a third. And then I will work up to my opener on bench right after. And that'll be about it as far as, those 2 things. And I'll worry about my deadlift a few days after that. But, about 2.5, 3 weeks out, we'll hit opener. That is, if I feel really confident, I won't touch it. In fact, the last time I PR'd my bench, I had never touched in the shirt leading into the meet, but I knew that if I could get it to a half board, because for me, the difference between a half board and a touch is just a little bit bigger breath and a little bit harder push with my legs and my stomach. So I know if I can get it down there confidently, I'm good to go. So because that half an inch in the bottom, that might be another 4 seconds of me holding the bar. And that alone is going to add so much more stress on top of, the fatigue and the recovery, that if I don't have to do it, I probably won't.
Yeah,
as long as I feel confident.
And then your deadlift, is there any change at all? Because it's kind of already in a pretty decent rotation as you lead into the meet.
I go back and forth on whether or not I take a reverse band pull about 5 weeks out. I did this time, and then I got a fucking cold right after it, and that just knocked me on my ass. I don't know why. The bigger I've gotten, the worse getting a simple cold has gotten. But that went fine. Then I deadlifted real heavy this week, and I'm over that, and that felt good. During the cold, and it's not something I should have done, and this is one of those things where, the athletes I coach are listening. It's do as I say, not as I do. I wanted to just see if I could, so I went and pulled my opener, and it moved fine. So I feel confident with that. But I'll go in, if we're going to squat heavy this Wednesday, I'll probably, instead of squatting on Sunday like we normally would with the group, I'll probably just pull my opener this upcoming Sunday, and that'll be it for about this work for the meet. I'll taper down real hard after that.
So during the tapering up phase before it starts to come down, How are you managing the accessories through that time period?
They're about the same.
Okay.
They're about the same as they normally would be in the off season, because what I don't want to do is drop any of the conditioning that I've built until the last possible second. So I want to keep as much of that conditioning leading into the meet, because that is what's going to carry me through that day.
What would be the last possible second?
I'll keep the GPP work in until the last week. I may down tune the intensity on it that Wednesday. But up until that Monday, it remains the same exact thing. And 2 weeks out, so we've got, if we're up into a week out is basically when I start like really pulling things out now. Now with my athletes, it's a little bit different. I start, kind of tapering back about 30% of their volume about 3 weeks out. But that will change based on, how long I've been working with them and how I see them recover. So I've had people that we can take a much heavier squat about a week out and they recover just fine, but that mentally gets them where they need to be. And it's typically more my raw lifters. I found that the geared lifters, we need more time just because we're working with heavier weights, but my raw lifters, I can get them to squat a little bit heavier, closer to the meet, and still perform really well, actually better than we would if we took, a little bit longer time to kind of taper off of that volume and that intensity.
Now, when you did the WPO, was it at the Olympia?
Yes, the last time I did it.
And what was that experience like compared to other meets that you've done?
I wasn't excited to have to walk a mile to get to the meet. It didn't help that
it was fast too. So I'm wondering how that played into you, because your conditioning's already there.
Well, I can confidently say that every WPO that I've gone to, I've come in swinging for the fences, and I got a little too aggressive on them. The first one I made, it was a perfect storm of stupid shit that happened. So this also coincided with the time in which I finally agreed to start taking medication. And my doctor did not see my messages that I was running out of my medication. So I came off of it cold turkey about 2 weeks before the WPO, and the symptoms of doing so hit me that week, and one of them was vertigo, like really bad. It would just hit me. The room would just start to spin. So that was one of the things. I blew my briefs out 2 weeks before, so I had to borrow somebody else's briefs, and I was too stubborn to lower my opener. So I bombed on bench the first time I did, on squat the first time I did the WPO. Next year was just bad planning. I just performed poorly again, but I came in swinging for the fences and didn't do what I wanted to do. And at that point it's like, well, fuck, like I'm not going to be happy with 90%. And then the year it was at the Olympia, we put my bench shirt on. I knew it was set wrong, but I was too stubborn to take it off and reset it on my arms. I said, well, this is fine. I can handle this weight no matter what. And it just bit me in the ass, but I felt conditioned, well for the day. My work capacity is very high. One, because I think it should be in powerlifters, but two, because I like that process of pushing it. And I felt well conditioned. I bombed out of that meet because I was stupid. Like I made a stupid decision, a stubborn one, where I said, that's fine, I'll be able to handle it. And by the third time I tried to handle it, it was getting over for the day. So
was it because it was that meet that you were processing things differently? Because it is, bringing the best all together in one place, and it's at the Olympia. So it's mentally it's at a different kind of place than if it's at any other meet. Do you think that's what that was? Or in other words, would those same stupid decisions be made at a different meet?
Probably. Well, because I think at that point that might have been meet 2 or 3 that I bombed out in a row. Just, I don't want to say that sometimes it happens, but sometimes it happens. It's part of the sport that we're in. And I think I thought to myself, well, there's surely, I made it through squats, so surely no way I'm going to bomb on the one that I'm most confident with. Why would I need to, my shirt was set too far into my armpits. So I had too much skin sitting below the sleeves. So I'd go to press off of the chest, and the transfer onto the triceps, I got very little compared to what I'm normally used to with the shirt set lower on the arms. And I knew it felt weird when we put it on, but warm-ups moved really well. So I said, okay, well, it's probably not that big of a deal. We go out there, try to hit my opener. I go to transition onto the triceps and I get nothing. I go, okay, well, let's just pull this, the shirt down, the collar down a little bit more. Same thing, go to push, transition onto the triceps, just didn't happen. And I thought, okay, well, it's fine. We'll just jack the collar a little bit more. We'll push it, and same shit on the third. I was too stubborn. And I knew the moment we put it on, it felt wrong. And I should have taken it off and just had him put it on again. But like I said, I was stubborn. I thought, well, it's weight that I can handle any day. I know I can hit this opener any day, and I just apparently not that day.
Well, it's kind of how meets work sometimes, right? The meets that you think you're going to do the shittiest at, it's kind of like some of the training sessions you were talking about before. The ones you think are going to suck, you end up doing real well. And then the meets you think that are going to go just phenomenal, you shit the bed. I bombed out once on the deadlift, which it still bothers me to this day. It was like it was like 150 pounds under my best. That fucking thing was bolted to the floor, and you're like, what? How? It's just still, it's like kind of like you said, you make it through the squat, like there's no way we're good, but any given day, man, some shit will just pop up out of nowhere. Bombing in the squat, whatever. I get that. But I've been around too long. I'm one of those guys that still think if you bomb in the squat, you should be done for the day.
I mean, that's my attitude. Like I showed up to do a whole meet. Why do I want to I don't want to waste the rest of the day. Now I say that I bombed on a squat last year and did a push-pull, but I was using the meet as basically my circummax day. I had a bunch of traveling going on, and I had to go down to the meet anyways. This was down over in Indy, and I bombed on the squat, and I said, okay, well, let's just get my heavy bench and my deadlift opener out of the way. So I just stuck it into that. But yeah, otherwise I'd go find the nearest Olive Garden.
So with the kids that you're working with, how do you go about navigating the conversation about what's probably trend now, but PEDs in general? Because it's kind of like a double-edged sword to where it's talked about more, like for a long period of time. How we even had a policy for the people that were on our site. I never said lie. I just said don't talk about it, right? So that's kind of how the whole country, not so much the world, kind of operated, is you just pivoted to conversation somewhere else. And my concern for that, and the reason I had that policy, was if you have any degree of influence and there are kids watching, and then you're speaking about that and they're on the fence, it could go either way. But I didn't want to be the person that steered that decision. They should decide for themselves, and I'm cool with whatever that decision is going to be on what that's going to be. But over the last many years, the conversations now everywhere, I have whole podcasts, just speaking about all that. And maybe I'm biased. I believe it's a net positive, but there's a trickle down effect that comes with that, which are your kids all know what trend is. They may know trend, but not even know it's a steroid. Like it's a creatine type thing. So how do you navigate those conversations? Because every lifter that I've ever spoken to that competes at a high level or been this for a long time all has the same stance. Wait as long as you possibly can. It's your decision one way or another how you're going to go about doing that. But it's generally not going to be when you're fucking 15 years old.
Yeah. I mean, my goal is I typically would try to shift the conversation over towards, okay, well, if that's where your head is at thinking about this stuff, what are the things you're not doing that you could absolutely do right now to be better? And most of the time when they're bringing this stuff up around me, it's in a fairly joking manner, but I know that they're trying to test the waters to get information about it. Like, is this really as bad as they say it is, or does it work as well as they say it is? And, you know, I have a pretty firm stance of like, no to all of that. Like, that's not what you do. That's not what we talk about, but like, we'll have a conversation about it. It's not something where I'm like, all right, kids, gather around. Like,
yeah.
It's one of those things where like, you know, I'll sit there and I go, well, you know, if that's, you know, if your goal is to be the best possible and you want to take things, what did your diet look like this week? We sat after this last football season, I brought all of our football players into a classroom, sat them down. They had to listen to me for an hour talk about nutrition. And they were very attentive. I told them this is how much we should about be eating. This is where we should be getting our food from. It's okay if you can only afford two McDoubles, because the macros on two McDoubles are awfully similar to a bowl from Chipotle. One is on paper probably better. It's got more fiber and more, you know, micronutrients, but the other one is okay if that's all you can get in. Because at the end of the day, for you guys, I want to make sure we're just maximizing intake to maximize output. But that's where I'll try to shift that conversation and say, well, what aren't you doing right now that you could easily control to immediately make yourself better? When did you go to bed last night? Like, what have you done outside of here to make sure that like you feel good? Like, do you have like a hobby outside of like your sports, your homework, and like your school right now? Like, is there anything else that you're doing, like nutrition wise? Show me your MyFitnessPal. I walked you through how to track everything on there. Show me the last week. And like, if they can't do that, it's like, why are we having a conversation about anything else? So that's typically where I try to shift it. I get a lot of questions about creatine. That's the big one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I mean, the kids, and I said, just tell your parents to send me an email. I'll talk to your parents about it. Well, I talked to them about it. I said, you know, if there's any supplements that we're going to take, here's the ones that I think are worthwhile. You can take protein and creatine, and then anything else. If you're not doing everything else I just told you about nutrition, you don't have any business worrying about literally any of that.
So with the parents, do they think creatine's a steroid?
Some of them still do. Yeah. And I don't fault them for it.
No.
When it was, gaining, real good traction within, like the supplement world, like there were, a lot of supplements that had steroids in them that they were pulling. And the fact that creatine works so well. I mean, we have so much evidence to just say, yes, it works. Like it is probably the most well-studied, supplement that we have. And that's just what I tell them. I say, like, it makes sense that you're worried about it, but like, here's how it's working. And I walk them through, like, we're looking at our body's energy systems here. Creatine just allows us to work for an extra 2 or 3 seconds when we're working through this. So when they're going for that, that like 4th rep, and they just need a little extra push, it's probably helping them. When they're running that 100 and they just need an extra second of push, it's probably helping them. And you're getting it in a normal diet anyways. So like, we can add a little bit extra in there. It's fine. As long as they're not taking the whole container in one setting, which...
Oh, they'll know.
They'll know.
They won't do that twice.
Yeah. So like, that's the one that comes up the most often. That, and I still have, I get it occasionally where parents, will be like, well, I don't want my son lifting. I don't want my daughter lifting. And then, and my initial reaction is, well, that's fucking stupid. But I have to remember that, like, okay, these people don't have the same like background as me.
It's not their world.
Yeah. So I back up and I say, well, can you explain to me why, tell me your concerns. Why do you think that? And then I do my best to nicely educate them. Like, here's like what I'm going to do. Here's how things are going to be controlled. Here's what we're looking to do. Your child is not going to be doing what I'm doing every weekend. Like similar approach. We're looking, but like, I care about your child, like your safety more than anything in here. So like, I'm not going to let them do something stupid. But the goal here is to get better, and we need to, push ourselves a bit. And that's just, that's the realm that we're in here. So typically after I have that conversation with them, they're fine. but getting them to have that conversation sometimes is a difficult thing because, you know, they're so set in, you know, not believing that this stuff works because they're just, they live in a different, you know, realm. So, but yeah, back to the trend thing. It comes up. It came up a bit more often a few years ago. I think there were a lot of people on TikTok at the time talking about it, and I think it's died down a little bit, at least where I exist. You know, I haven't had as many, you know, kids ask me questions about it, but, you know, I typically, you know, I try to deflect a little bit on it, and then if they want to talk about it, I'll give them, you know, everything that I know within reason that I think a high schooler should know about it. Like, this is what it will do to your body. This is what it can do. Yes, it might work in this way, but this is not what we do. So, you know.
Well, if they're making progress.
That too. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's how much is the progress going to be compounded when they're already making great strides with what they're doing from the first place? How do you navigate because most of these kids that you're working with are in person, but you have an online side as well. So how do you go about navigating that?
So there's not a lot of crossover with that. So I don't, with, you know, my own personal business, I will very rarely post about my involvement with the kids. I don't, something about it, and I could, there's a lot of content that I could make, you know, showing off what I do, you know, like with them.
But I get it. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. There's that aspect of it. And I think, you know, from a professionalism standpoint, like, one, like, these kids, even if they said they're okay with it, like, I know at some point a parent will be like, why are you doing this? So like, I don't even touch it. I'm more than happy to explain what I do with the kids. I do run like an Instagram for them, but it's not something I post about. You know, like, I post like their highlights. I post our weekly schedule on it. And that's probably 50% of the posts, maybe even more. But as far as like my own posting online and the way that I interact with, you know, clients in general, I took a very strict stance on, I don't post or send out anything that I would not be 100% comfortable with somebody screenshotting and sending to our principal or one of our district admins. It just,
well, I'm speaking more with working with those clients online because you don't see them. You don't see them every day. You know, you're not asking them, how are you doing? You know, before every training session. So you're losing a lot of feedback, you know, with those. So what's your process like if somebody's working with you online?
Okay. So I use an app program. It's called Train Heroic. What I let the athletes know, like right when I bring them on, is the more information you give me with your check-ins, the more I have to work off of and the more I, you know, have to kind of guide things forward. And some of them will say, well, is this too much? And I said, don't worry about it being too much. Let me sift through what's important and what isn't. I just want you to share anything you think is relevant. And that can be like pulling teeth. You know, there's some people who won't give me anything and I can only go off of their minimal notes and what they have filled out on, you know, the program for me. And I go, okay, well, you know, that's great. I have some people who will just only send me, you know, their videos and I'll send them back my full check-in on it. Say, hey, this was good. This wasn't. This is what we need to do. This is what I need you to focus on. Here's some additional stuff that we need to work on, blah, blah, blah. But I found that, you know, the more that they share, the stronger the relationship gets, the better rapport that we build with each other. And then on top of that, the more that they're willing to share moving down the line. And the ones who share the most make the best progress. It is what it is. And I'm very transparent with them. If I have somebody who doesn't share with me, you know, a lot on their check-ins, I'll tell them straight up. I said, look, like, you can make much better progress if you literally just took an extra minute to just send me some more information. That's it. Like, and the ones who are, you know, fully bought into it do that. And the ones who don't typically don't end up being clients for very long. I tell them, you know, I'm not going to chase you down for it. But again, you know, the more that you share, the better this will go for you. Because if you're paying me, use me. That's what it is. Like, it is a service. I'm trying to deliver a service to you, and if you're not using it, like, why are you paying for it in the first place? So,
how do you find that turnover rate, you know, with those people that aren't that good fit, you know, and then kind of kick out, compared to, I mean, how long will they last before that kind of, they kick out?
I can typically tell within the first few weeks if somebody's going to stick around for a while, based on the quality of their check-ins. If they come in and they're, you know, super excited about it and they give me good information, that's a really good indicator that they're planning on sticking around. But before I even take an athlete on, I have them fill out, you know, a pretty long questionnaire, just, you know, general stuff. What's your weight class? Where do you like to compete? What's your current, you know, PRs? But also stuff like, what are your goals? What's your most immediate goal with powerlifting? What's your goal in 5 years with powerlifting? You know, how well do you understand things right now? Have you ever worked with a coach before? Explain why you stopped working with them. And that information allows me to make a decision on whether or not I'm going to work with somebody. Because I just don't take anybody who, you know, fills out the application. Like, I'll tell them, like, I'm not interested in working with you for a single meet prep, because I can tell you, right, if you hire me for 8 weeks, there's only so much I can do in 8 weeks. Like, yeah, there's things that we can do to maximize your physiological, you know, ability here. But like, anything I do in 8 weeks probably isn't getting you stronger, truly. We're just taking advantage of what you currently have. What I want is people who are going to be committed for, you know, a good period of time so we can actually build. And I'm straight up with them about that. And, you know, the ones who are okay with all that, I don't have many people who don't last for at least, you know, a year and a half. And the people who do, like I said, kind of step away, typically will step away because they have either just, you know, kind of lost interest in the sport or just want to focus on something else. And you know, I don't fault them for that. It's not people. Occasionally I'll get people who kind of slip through who are just coach hopping. And that drives me crazy. You know, you could be so much better at this if you just were consistent. Yes. Like, just stick with something. And it's conjugate, especially, because conjugate, it's a slow burn. You know, if you've been training for a while, like, we can, of course, I can take a high schooler, I could put, you know, 50, 60 pounds on their max in 3 months, no problem. But if you take somebody who's been doing this for 6, 7 years, sometimes we're only going to get 5 pounds on this, and you need to be okay with that. Like, and especially with the way that, you know, that I make new athletes do things, there's usually an initial period of frustration when I yell at them and say, please stop putting weight on the bar. Yeah. We need to pull back because you're not doing things well.
Where there's an adaptation time.
Yeah.
You know, where I hear the same thing from similar coaches is, you know, you're all trying to figure out the best way to vet that person, you know, before you commit into, you know, an annualized plan, which would actually, it'd be optimal to have like a 2-year plan that you could build from, but annualized is kind of far enough, you know, with that, you know, so everybody's kind of struggling with how can we get to that point as soon as we possibly can, because when you get there, then it's like, okay, look, we're going to have, you know, these 2 blocks stacked together, kind of how you lay it, which is going to be this, which may not be what you really like that much. It will build enough in, you know, that you like it, but it's necessary. Yeah. And this has to happen before this next, you know, one happens. And I think from what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, the thought process on lifters has shifted more to understanding that, you know, it's still more rampant than it should be. The people that just want to hire people for a prep, you know, which, as you said, there's all you're really kind of doing is fixing some technical shit and kind of dialing in, you know, their ability to recover and maybe some technical, you know, but the real work happens after. The best time to hire a coach would be right after the meet. Yeah. You know, that would be, and you don't have another one for a year that you really care about. You know, maybe there's one in there that's a tester or some shit like that.
But like, I mean, even with that, like when I ask them, like, have you worked with a coach? And if they answer that, and I want them to answer it as truthfully as possible. If they say they're currently working with a coach, my first answer is, well, why? Like, I need you to take a step back and look at that relationship. Are you still making progress? Like what about that, like, situation is not working for you? Because I'm not trying to poach anybody's clients. So the last thing I want to do. And that also raises a red flag to me, where it's like, at what point are you just going to be like, okay, well, I need something else from me? So it's like, there's reasons why I ask these questions, because I'm not looking for like a 8-10 weeks thing and then be done. It doesn't interest me. Like if I truly want, the coaching, the art of coaching to come through, it has to be a long-term process, because that's how this works. I mean, like every, cohort of kids at the school, I've got 4 years with. To see how these things play out. And I mean, that's great. I got 4 just standard years with them. But powerlifting is a little bit different, but I mean, I would love to keep the, one, from a job security standpoint, but also like I said, the longer that somebody works with me, the easier it is to, program with them. I learn how they react to things better. We can fine tune things a lot better. And then it gets to this point where I've had athletes working with me for, 2, 3, 4. My longest athlete's been with me for, 6-7 years. It becomes, we know exactly, I have to put very little detail into things, outside of like, the actual exercise selection. He knows exactly what I want, because we've built such a good rapport with very minimal, kind of notes on things. And, I know how he responds really well, and he understands the process with me really well. And that's the best situation, where there's this really good symbiotic relationship where we both understand each other really well, and it just flourishes.
Yeah.
So,
were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
Oh, I don't think so off the top of my head.
I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier when we were talking about the WPO and the meat prep stuff. You briefly mentioned visualization.
Yep.
Do you build that into your full program?
So that is something that I will try to, so personally or for my
personally
athletes? Okay. So personally, that's something that I will try to do as I'm going through sort of that breathing, progressive relaxation technique as I'm leading into the meet, because what that allows me to do is not only get the mental reps for it, because, by the time I walked up to the bar at the meet, I've done it 100 times in my own head. And I think that's very important. But it also allows me to do it while I'm intentionally trying to control my internal ability to relax. And I think that helps take away, that like scary aspect of walking up to a bar with 1,000 pounds on it. I haven't been nervous to get underneath 1,000 pounds in, handful of years now, because that's just how my brain works with it. Like I spend so much time thinking about that process, going through it, trying to be as technical as possible before I even have to do, the movement, that again, I've done it 1,000 times, before I even try it.
Now, when you're mentally rehearsing this, how detailed are you? Are you going from the chalk box to how you grab the bar to foot placement?
The moment I walk up to the bar. So for me, like I'm visualizing internally, taking my pinky, jamming my pinky up underneath the bar, wrapping my 3 fingers. I'm walking through that process and thinking about exactly what each one of those things feel like, and stacking myself underneath the bar, building that tension. I mean, it's got to be like 20 times slower than it's actually happening, but forcing myself to think through that helps. I mean, so much. And that was probably the biggest takeaway from any exercise, psychology class I took, was the benefits of visualization and how that affects performance, based on, your mirror neurons and whatnot, just firing, we can think about it, and those light up similar, areas of the brain in terms of how we're actually, doing things, or even watching other people do it. I think, what we can gain. I sit back and watch my videos over and over and over again, and I just look at, okay, what are my hands doing? What are my knees doing? What do I think I was thinking about at that time? And I ask my athletes to do the same thing. It's like when I see something, I say, I want you to go back and I want you to watch video 1 and 3, and I want you to look at exactly this moment in time. Go through it. try to remember exactly what you were thinking about, because we need to figure out how to apply this from set 3 onto set 1. So it's stuff like that where like, let's break it down. Let's make the system more stable. And if we can go in with just a better plan, better execution, the whole thing will just be better.
So with the athletes, are you trying to get them to develop a mental checklist?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
If it's a squat, what is the mental checklist with your athletes that you're trying to get them to go through with a squat on each rep? So we were talking about visualization, but how do you want them to approach the bar, and what steps do you want them to take until the rep actually through the completion of the rep?
Okay. So the biggest thing is making sure that we are consistent. So I tell them, initially that this process has to be the same every single time we do it. So whether you set your hands first, whether you're looking at putting your feet first, like whatever it is, we need to make sure that the process is the exact same every single time. Because if we change it every single time, it's going to be different every single time. So typically it's, okay, let's set the hands where they're going to be. Let's make sure that the chest is lined up with the bar. Then let's check the feet. We check the feet by looking down, making sure that bar is lined up with right about the front of the shin, mid foot there. And then we're going to get underneath the bar. Depending on how they do that, depending on their body type, where their hands are, we may swing all the way underneath and then tension underneath it, or they may go straight to where the bar is going to be on their back. At that point, we're just sort of checking the tension on it. The process that I like to kind of go through is like, we're just pushing in it enough to know that it feels right before we actually start that whole process of bracing and wedging underneath it. But once all of that is set, so hands, feet, bars where it needs to be, we're going to take that breath in. We're going to tighten everything up where we need to tighten it. Our raw lifters are going to, tighten up their rib cage a little bit different than our guys in gear who are, a little bit wider stance. And that's, based on the individual. And we're going to try to get our body to just be perfectly stacked. Because if we're in a mono lift, I want them to just get that bar to float. If we set the tension exactly where it needs to be, and we get our hips stacked underneath us, and that back is just stacked perfectly right, underneath the bar will float. It'll feel effortless. So if we can slow that down, think through that, get the tension where it needs to be, and then stand up with it. I mean, that's the process there. And depending on, the actual kind of execution there, I can get more specific in terms of like, okay, well, we need to learn how to root better with the feet. You need to take your big toe, push that into the, the sole of your shoe a little bit harder. But, for the most part, once, like I said, that initial, onboarding process with them, the first few months, I have a lot of athletes who get frustrated with me because I ask them to, pull back on a lot of it. One of the things I say to them is like, we're going to take one step backwards for you to take 5 forward, but it might not be 6 months before I let you take 5 forward. And you need to just do this, because if we can tighten up this stuff, if you can just learn how to think your way through the movement better and gain more control, we don't even have to get stronger, but you will have more weight on the bar. Yeah, I want every one of my athletes, I want to be the best technician that their body allows them to be. There is, of course, room built in for individual just style. But I typically will ask them to pull back and then meet them halfway if their style isn't perfectly, lined up with where kind of that technique needs to go. But a lot of times, the athletes I bring on don't understand their own mechanics, and it's just like, hey, let's just pull back, get you where you need to be. But, back to the point, it's, the checklist there. Hands, feet, get the body set where it needs to be. And then I think the biggest thing that we end up focusing on, especially for my geared people, is learning how to build that tension throughout the entire body to make sure that unrack is effortless versus just kind of popping into it super hard. So again, but that goes back to just slowing things down, stabilizing the system as a whole to get a better output on the back end.
Now with your kids, what's the bench press? What's that process?
So with the kids, now, as you're probably aware, most kids don't have lats. They just don't. The real athletic ones have somehow built them. Most kids don't know what it means to retract and depress their scaps. It's not important. So I teach them, we sit there before we even get on a bench press, arms straight out, squeeze back like we're trying to squeeze a piece of paper, and then puff your chest up big like you're trying to show off. They can do that, but it takes reps and reps and reps and reps and reps and tons of volume for them to even be able to do it with the bar in their hands. And that's just how we do it. I teach them how to do it without it. And then as they get on the bench, you know, the biggest cue that I use is just give me a big chest while you're benching. I mean, that's really it. Until they've gone through, you know, 1,000 reps on a bench press, they're not going to master it.
Yeah.
And I go through this with my assistant, who's a young guy. He's a former, you know, student there, athlete. And he asked me this question, you know, these questions quite often, like at what point, like, do we really need to worry about this? And I'm like, we probably don't. Like, the biggest thing that these kids need is just the volume doing the thing. Like the kids are highly adaptable. It doesn't matter if their shoulder blade is totally retracted or depressed where it needs to be. If we're getting volume on them, that is going to be the most important thing. And that's what I've noticed over working with the high schoolers, that the ones who have excelled the most by the time they are seniors are the ones who have done the most. So you just got to work them. I could get super technical, but it's going to go straight over the high schooler's head, and it matters. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's a lot easier to tackle it when they've got a really good base of strength.
Now, what about the deadlift?
Deadlift is a lot more like form focused. So like deadlift, when I'm initially teaching them like this, you know, it's the middle school group, they're allowed to deadlift because I want them, you know, the program that I run for the middle schoolers is a light version of what we do at the high school level. I take the absolute most important things. We deadlift, we squat, we goblet squat. They learn how to RDL. After I have them for a handful of weeks, they learn how to bench. We do a ton of push-ups, a ton of lunges, and that's about it. I mean, I don't add a ton of stuff, and there's some banded stuff like face pulls and inverted row, you know, nothing super crazy, but it's super basic. And there is, most weeks we just run a 5x5. And the initial weeks that I have them, it's like, okay, hey, we're only allowed to put the 10-pound bumpers on. You show me you can move it well, I'll let you go up. And once I have them for a few weeks, okay, we're doing a 5x5 again. As long as it looks good, you can add weight. And they get angry at me when I say you need to take weight off. But I think it's good to allow them to push it a little bit, as long as they're staying within, you know, kind of that, you know, the bumpers like on a bowling alley. And, you know, it's, again, you know, my assistant asked me the question, like, at what point do we worry about their backs? And I go, well, as long as they look generally good, again, they're adaptable. I want them to train in shitty positions occasionally. Like it shouldn't be like terrible, but it's okay, you know, if their shoulders are a little bit forward and they're not, you know, fully stacked on some of this stuff. I'm okay with that. They literally just don't have the ability to control it, and the only way they're going to learn how to control it is to just continue to do the movement and just continue to get that feedback from me. So but deadlift is one where I do hold them back a little bit longer in terms of weight wise, just because I know if they go home and tell their mom that, like, we did deadlifts today and my back hurts a little bit, I'm gonna get an email and the mom's gonna be like, why are you deadlifting my son? Say, well, let's have this conversation. Like,
yeah, well, the other thing would be, you know, what are the odds that they're going to just max out in their buddy's basement or their buddy's garage, you know? So if you're in the process of teaching them what's correct and what's not correct, it will protect them from doing this stupid shit, which they're still going to do. If they're probably not so much on the squat, but they're going to do it on the deadlift and they're going to do it on the bench. Probably more so on the deadlift than anything else.
But again, I'm in a really great spot where a lot of the kids are just coming to do all their work with me. And again, we're in an area where, you know, the parents have the money to put them, you know, into these private training facilities. And I came in and they bought in really well, just immediately. So like I said, it's a perfect storm. I've got kids who understand their bodies well, who are coachable, who have the support from, you know, home for the most part, and they are truly flourishing within the program. The ones who, you know, really buy in, which is most of the kids that show up.
That's a great setup. How can people go about finding you?
So I really just run, you know, the Instagram. It's at Conjugate Strong. Don't really do anything else. I got a YouTube, but it's just an encyclopedia for exercises that I program, so I can link them. So that's pretty much it.
I got gift here for you. It's probably these stupid strings stuck in there. There's a shirt in there. There's some element packs, one of the sponsors, that have a training log in there. And then in the log, there's a coin that I have. And the coin is something that I've been giving out to people for many years. You know, I give them to people that embody the aim of why I started the company, which is to live, learn, and pass on, which all content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.